Halloween has always been more than costumes and candy. Beneath the pumpkins, the laughter, and the warm glow of porch lights, something older and darker waits in the shadows. It's the one night of the year when the barrier between the living and the dead feels just a little thinner. When stories whispered for generations suddenly come alive. This collection, drawn from our book Spooky Halloween, was created to capture that feeling. The chill in the air, the crunch of leaves underfoot, the uneasy sense that something might be watching you from across the street. These aren't fairy tales or harmless ghost stories. Many are inspired by real accounts and folklore that have haunted small towns for decades. The kind of stories you're warned never to tell in the dark. The link to the book is waiting for you below, in the description, or in the comments. And as you turn these pages, remember, every tale has roots in something real, an event, a place, or a rumor that refused to die. Because Halloween isn't just a holiday, it's a reminder that sometimes the masks come off, and what's left behind is far more terrifying than we imagined. So, light a candle, check your locks, and step inside. The stories are waiting. It was that time of year again, spooky season, the nights creeping longer, the cold seeping deeper, and the world slipping into shadows so thick they felt alive. Every autumn, no matter where I am or what I'm doing, the memory returns. I rarely speak of it because it's not a ghost story or a haunted house tale. No creaky attic, no ghostly whispers or eerie tapes. It's quieter, stranger, more insidious. It lingers long after the night ends, like a slow, spreading stain. For 3 years, I worked the night shift at a massive manufacturing plant on the edge of a dying town. The place was a relic from the 70s. Steel beams, concrete floors, and a patchwork of aging machinery that groaned and rattled like a tired beast. The plant sat hemmed in by dense woods, black enough to swallow any stray light beyond the floodlights that circled the perimeter. It was a fortress built to keep things out, and maybe, I thought later, to keep something in. Security was tight. Cameras covered every angle. We had motion sensors, alarms, and a network of guards who rotated through the long, lonely hours. But once the day crew left, isolation took over like a shroud. The night crew was small. 5 guards and 5 administrative staff like me. Though I was officially admin, my supervisor often roped me into security patrols or camera duty, partly because I was one of the few people who showed up on time and didn't complain too loudly. Most nights dragged on in dull monotony. The distant hum of machines, ventilation whispers, radios crackling with static. But the plant had a reputation, not for ghosts or tragedies, but for something else. A weight in the air, a presence lurking just beyond sight. Shadows that moved deliberately, sounds with no source, a chill pressing on your chest that made every breath catch. It was a little before Halloween, about 2 weeks out, when everything changed. That night, I finished my paperwork just past midnight. The dull ache in my muscles, the stale recycled air, all begged me outside. I needed to breathe, to shake the tension that had knotted itself deep inside me over the shift. The night had been uneventful until then. Nothing more than the usual creaks and distant clatters that were easy to ignore. Pulling on my jacket, I stepped out the back door onto cracked concrete steps. The cold hit first, a sharp, biting cold that cut through my jacket and settled on my skin like icy fingers. The smell of wet earth and rotting leaves filled the air, heavy and alive. I lit a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating my fingers before sinking into smoke that curled and vanished into the chill. My other hand cradled a steaming cup of coffee, warmth battling the cold, but mostly losing. Motion-activated floodlights blinked in their mechanical rhythm, washing the cracked concrete and weeds in harsh, sterile light. Beyond the chain-link fence, darkness sprawled, vast and hungry, an endless black void that seemed to swallow the weak glow of the moon. I sat on the steps, pulling out my phone and scrolling mindlessly through social media. Videos blurred past unseen. My body was tense, eyes flicking to shadows that seemed to twitch and twist just at the edge of my vision. The moon hung thin and pale, its silver light casting long, trembling shadows that danced in the slight breeze. Then, the floodlight flickered off. The cold swallowed me whole. The silence deepened, thick, viscous, almost breathing. The hum of machines faded into nothing, as if the world itself had paused. Only the faint rustle of dry leaves whispered in the night air. I took a drag from my cigarette, smoke dissolving into the cold, and a shiver crawled down my spine. It wasn't just the cold. Something else was there. I waved my hand toward the motion sensor. The floodlight snapped back on, blinding, clinical. Then I heard it, jingling, metallic, slow, calculated, not the random clatter of wind in the fence. My pulse thudded loud in my ears. "Hello?" I called, voice brittle and small against the vast night. The jingling stopped. I squinted into the dark beyond the light's reach, searching. The floodlight blinked off again, plunging me into shadows. The moonlight revealed a silhouette, a slender figure at the fence, twisting and tugging chain links with deliberate movements. It wasn't the usual pranksters. This felt wrong. Cold. Watching. Frozen, I reached for my radio, voice tight. "North fence, back door area. Someone's here," static answered. "Cameras show nothing." "I'm here." I swear no one explained it. The cameras covered every inch. Empty grass, shadows, nothing. My cigarette dropped, crushed underfoot. Coffee went cold. Suddenly, the fence rattled violently. The figure bolted. Faster than human. Panic crashed into me. I stumbled, heart hammering, breath ragged. Scrambling for the door, hands fumbling the lock, shaking. The doorknob rattled, hard, insistent, jolting shocks up my arm. My breath came ragged. Something heavy pressed against the door, forceful, deliberate. My radio screamed static, drowning my calls. Seconds dragged, endless. Then, silence. 2 guards arrived, flashlights piercing the dark. The pounding stopped. They laughed it off. Great Halloween prank. Shadows and nerves, I smiled weakly. But inside, ice gripped me. The video playback revealed nothing. No figure, no intruder. Only me, frantic outside the locked door. But then the door handle. On grainy footage from both inside and outside angles, it moved, pulsing, trembling, as if something on the other side was trying to force it open. No cuts in the fence, no disturbed grass, no sign of entry. The building stayed silent. Rumors faded. The back door stayed locked. Weeks later, the longest-serving guard whispered, "I've never liked the North End. Feels like something watches." That was the first and last time I heard him say it. I stayed nights 7 more months, never near that door. Breaks were inside, among co-workers. I stopped smoking outside. Some noticed. No one asked. Months slipped by, but the weight never lifted. Every night I felt eyes, too many eyes, watching me from the darkness beyond the fence. Sometimes I thought I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. A flicker of a shape, a quick shadow darting between trees. One night, I decided to test it. I took the security camera tablet with me and crept out near the fence. The night air was still, the forest silent. I watched the grainy black and white feed, zooming in on the fence line. For hours, nothing. Then, jingle. Slow, deliberate. The same metallic sound. I turned quickly, flashlight in hand. Empty. I scanned the tree line. Nothing. A chill crept down my spine, and I shut off the tablet, pocketed it, and walked back inside, trying to convince myself it was an animal or a prank. But that night, the jingle echoed in my mind long after I left work. Years later, after I left that job, the memory haunted me. One cold, late October night, while driving past the old plant on my way home, I saw it again. A pale figure standing beyond the chain-link fence, motionless in the moonlight. But this time, its face was unmistakably mine. Watching, waiting, and I knew it was never alone. Halloween has always been my favorite holiday. The crisp autumn air, the smell of leaves, the excitement of costumes and candy, it all felt magical when I was growing up. But that year, the magic turned into something I'll never forget. That Halloween started like any other, or so I thought. My little brother and I were home alone because our parents had gone out to a party. We were tasked with handing out candy to trick-or-treaters, a duty we had reluctantly accepted since we had bigger plans. We wanted to go trick-or-treating ourselves. Too old, my parents said. Invite your friends over instead. Our friends politely declined. They still wanted to go door to door, so it was just the two of us. By 10 p.m., the candy was nearly gone, and we were sitting on the couch, watching a scary movie, stuffing ourselves with the last handfuls of chocolate and candy corn. The house felt quiet. Too quiet. Then came the knock. It was soft at first, hesitant, almost polite. I froze, my stomach tightening. Who could be at the door this late? Halloween trick-or-treaters were long gone. My brother whispered, "Maybe it's the neighbors?" But something about the sound made my hair stand on end. I crept to the door and looked through the peephole. There he was, a man standing on our porch, completely still. He wore a black hoodie with the hood pulled up, shadowing his face. Only his thin, cracked lips and a sparse beard were visible. His hands were stuffed deep into his pockets, and he trembled slightly, though it wasn't cold outside. My mind screamed at me. This wasn't normal. He knocked again, harder this time, his movements slightly desperate. I whispered to my brother, "Stay back." Then he spoke. His voice was raspy, almost mocking. "Are you alone in there?" My brother's hand went to his phone. "Should I call the police?" he asked quietly, almost scared to speak. I held my finger to my lips, signaling him to stay quiet. Every instinct in my body screamed, this man was dangerous. I had to handle this. I took a deep breath and shouted in the most intimidating voice I could manage, "Get the hell away from our house or I'll call the police!" For a moment, nothing happened. Then, his smile twisted into something horrible. He bared his teeth, yellowed and uneven. His eyes, what little I could see of them, were furious, almost predatory. My heart hammered in my chest. I watched him carefully as he finally stepped back from the door, still staring at me. Minutes passed. My brother and I didn't breathe. We didn't move. Eventually, he left the porch, disappearing into the shadows of our street. We waited another 10 minutes before even thinking about closing the door. My hands were shaking, and my stomach churned, but somehow we convinced ourselves that it was over. The next day, we learned why my instincts had screamed so loudly that night. An elderly woman, who lived a few houses down from us, had been brutally murdered. She had been stabbed multiple times on her front porch, right where anyone walking by could see her. Nothing had been stolen, no valuables, no money, just a life taken senselessly. And as we recalled the man from the night before, the horrifying truth became clear. That was him. That same face, those same hands, that same cold, calculating gaze. My brother and I had stared at a murderer, and we had survived. The days that followed were tense and surreal. Our parents tried to comfort us, but even they couldn't hide their own unease. The police canvassed the neighborhood, asking questions, but without more information, there was little they could do. The man was gone, leaving only fear behind. I started checking locks obsessively, peering out windows, and imagining that at any moment, he could return. My brother, too young to understand fully, sensed it in his own way. He clung to me more, asked me to walk with him to school, and sometimes woke in the middle of the night, afraid of shadows that weren't there. Eventually, life tried to resume its normal rhythm. We moved on, at least on the surface. Then came the Halloween of the next year. I had told myself the previous year's terror was a one-time event, a fluke, a twist of fate. But as the sun went down and the familiar orange glow filled the streets, I felt the same unease creeping back in. We were home again, this time with my parents, who insisted it was just another Halloween. "You're safe," they told me. That night, I stood at the door, giving out candy. Laughter echoed down the street as children in masks ran from house to house. For a brief moment, I believed them. I started to relax. Then I noticed a figure lingering at the end of our walkway. He was tall, dressed in all black. His face was hidden behind a cheap plastic ghost mask. He wasn't with the kids. He didn't move or speak. He just stood there, watching. I stiffened. A knot formed in my throat. He raised a hand, slowly, deliberately, and waved. Not a friendly wave. Not playful. It was cold. Intentional. And I knew. It was him. I backed into the house without closing the door. My voice caught in my throat. I couldn't speak, couldn't scream. Then my mother appeared beside me, saw my face, and followed my gaze. By the time she stepped onto the porch, the figure was gone. I wanted to believe it was just someone messing around, a prank, a coincidence. But in my gut, I knew. It was him. After that night, I changed. Halloween lost its charm. I stopped answering the door after dark. I never went out alone. My parents supported me, though they worried the fear was eating away at me. Maybe it was, but I couldn't ignore what I had seen, what I had felt. Even simple things like going to the mailbox at dusk made my skin crawl. My brother, now more aware, shared that unease. We didn't talk about it much, but we both knew we were looking over our shoulders more often. I replayed it over and over. The raspy voice, the twisted smile, the eyes, the trembling. I thought about the elderly woman, what she must have seen in her last moments, and what might have happened if my brother and I had been a little slower to react. Sometimes survival is just luck. Years went by. I grew up. I moved to a new city, went to college, started a job. The fear faded, but never fully left. It lived quietly in the background, like a low hum I couldn't quite shake. Then, 3 years ago, on a night just like the one before, it happened again. I was walking home from work. It was late, nearly midnight. I took a shortcut through a quiet residential street I didn't usually use. The wind had that same autumn sharpness. The street was dimly lit, leaves skittering across the sidewalk. That's when I saw him, across the street, standing perfectly still beneath a flickering street lamp. Black hoodie, hands in pockets, not moving. My chest tightened. I tried not to stare. I picked up my pace, heart pounding, eyes locked ahead. Then he raised his hand, slowly, deliberately, and waved. I froze mid-step. A car passed behind me, and when I looked again, he was gone. I haven't seen him since, but I know he's still out there, somewhere, waiting. Halloween used to feel like fun and mischief, but now I know better. It's a mask, a cover for real monsters who walk among us. That man at the door, he never left, not really. He became part of my world, a constant shadow, a whisper that reminds me not to let my guard down. I double-check my locks. I don't answer the door after dark. I trust my instincts, always, because sometimes danger doesn't knock loudly. Sometimes it just waits. I hadn't been back to my grandmother's farmhouse in nearly a decade, and driving through those winding country backroads brought a strange mix of comfort and unease. The autumn sun dipped low, throwing long shadows across the golden fields, and the air carried that sharp bite of October that always made me think of Halloween. I could almost smell the pumpkin bread Grandma used to bake, and hear the rustle of the cornfields that bordered her land. As a child, those visits had been the highlight of my year. Trick-or-treating in a small town, running through leaf piles and carving pumpkins on the back porch while Grandma hummed old folk songs. But there was always one thing that stood out more than anything else: her scarecrow. That scarecrow wasn't just some stuffed figure tossed together with old clothes. It was a landmark. Everyone in the county knew about it. With its massive frame, crooked hat, and a burlap sack face stitched with crude black thread, it had a presence. My cousins and I used to dare each other to touch it at night, swearing it would move if you looked away. To me, it had always been unsettling, though Grandma would laugh and call it her guardian of the harvest. I couldn't wait to see it again. When I finally pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly as I remembered. White siding, a sagging porch swing, and smoke curling lazily from the chimney. The place radiated warmth, and when Grandma came to the door, flour still dusting her apron, she pulled me into one of her tight embraces that always smelled of cinnamon and earth. Inside, everything was cozy. The old clock ticked on the mantel, and the kitchen smelled like nutmeg and cloves. For a little while, I let myself sink into nostalgia as we chatted over tea and pumpkin bread. But eventually, I found myself drawn outside, eager to see the scarecrow again. Only when I stepped out into the crisp evening air, something felt wrong. The scarecrow stood at the edge of the cornfield, but it wasn't the same figure I remembered. Its burlap face sagged oddly, the stitching uneven as if someone had redone it by hand. The button eyes were darker, almost wet-looking, and I could have sworn they glinted when the moonlight hit. Its clothes were ragged, yes, but they hung differently, almost too heavy for the wind to stir. A chill prickled at the back of my neck. For a moment, I felt sure it was looking right at me. "Don't stare at it too long," Grandma's voice called from behind me, startling me. She stood in the doorway, her arms crossed. Old Scarecrow has a way of getting under your skin. I laughed nervously. "You make it sound like it's alive." Grandma didn't smile. "Sometimes I think it is." Then she turned back inside without another word. That night, I tried to shake the unease as I busied myself decorating. I strung orange lights along the porch, carved a few pumpkins, and set them glowing by the steps. Still, every time I looked up, I saw it, standing in the distance, unmoving, yet different somehow. At first I thought it was my imagination, but by the third or fourth glance I was certain. It wasn't facing the field anymore. It was turned toward the house. I told myself it must have always been that way, but doubt gnawed at me. The tilt of its head seemed deliberate, like it was studying me, watching. That night I had trouble sleeping. The wind howled across the fields, rattling the old windows, and more than once I thought I heard footsteps crunching through the leaves outside. At one point, I peeked through the curtains and nearly screamed. The Scarecrow was closer, its silhouette looming at the fence line now, instead of the edge of the field. The next morning, I found the pumpkins I'd carved smashed to pieces on the porch. Grandma clucked her tongue and muttered about local kids, but when I pointed out that there were no tracks in the frost, she just frowned and told me to leave it alone. The days leading up to Halloween grew stranger. I'd wake to find the Scarecrow in a different position, arms raised, head tilted, shoulders hunched. Once, I swore its feet were pointed toward the porch steps. Another time, I saw it leaning ever so slightly forward, as if straining to hear something. And then came the voices. Soft at first, just whispers on the wind, calling my name from the cornfield. At night, when the house grew quiet, I'd hear them clearer. "Emily," a hiss, urgent and low. "Come outside." I asked Grandma if she'd ever heard anything. She looked pale, almost frightened, and simply said, "Best to ignore it. The Scarecrow's been here longer than me, longer than this house. It..." Remembers her words did nothing to ease my fear. On Halloween night, I couldn't shake the dread that hung in the air. The moon was full, casting long shadows that made the yard feel alive. Trick-or-treaters came and went, their laughter distant and hollow, but I barely noticed them. My eyes kept drifting to the window, to the dark figure beyond the cornfield. When I looked again around midnight, it was gone. Panic seized me. I checked the porch, the yard, the road. Nothing. Then a whisper, closer this time, floated through the night air. "Help me." The words sent ice through my veins. I fumbled for my phone, but the screen showed no service. The house creaked. The front door shuddered. Then slowly, it began to open. A tall figure stepped inside, its head nearly brushing the doorframe. Ragged clothes clung to its body, and that burlap face, stitched, sagging, grotesque, was no longer slack. The mouth moved. "You shouldn't have come back," it rasped. My body locked up with terror. The air felt thick, heavy. The figure stepped closer, the smell of rot wafting from it, and instinct took over. I bolted up the stairs and into the nearest bedroom, slamming the door behind me. The whispers began again, louder now, a chorus. "Emily, help me, let me out." I pressed my back to the wall, clutching my useless phone. Then came the first thump on the door, and another. The frame rattled, the wood splintering. When it stopped, I didn't move for what felt like hours. Eventually, silence fell, so heavy it made my ears ring. I crept to the window and looked out, my stomach churning. The Scarecrow was back, standing in the yard below, staring up at me with that stitched grin. Only now I could see the threads moving, tugging upward, as if something inside was smiling. The whispers slid into my head once more. You must leave before it's too late." I staggered back, remembering the stories Grandma once told me as a child. How the scarecrow was a vessel, a prison for restless spirits lost in the fields, a curse bound to the land to protect the harvest, and maybe, just maybe, to claim anyone who stayed too long. That was all I needed. I grabbed my bags, ran down the stairs, and tore out the front door. The night air wrapped around me, thick with whispers, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back until I reached my car. When I did, the scarecrow was gone. Or maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was closer than ever, hidden in the rows of corn, waiting. As I sped down the country road, the farmhouse shrinking into the distance, I swore I heard it one last time. Faint, hollow, carried on the wind. See you next Halloween. Halloween night has always been a threshold, where the familiar world blurs with shadows, and childhood innocence dances on the edge of fear. The crisp autumn air carries whispers of forgotten tales, and every rustling leaf seems to hide a secret waiting to be uncovered. It's a night where the ordinary becomes strange, and the brave or foolish step into the dark. The air was sharp and cold, as it had been every Halloween since I could remember. A biting chill that snuck beneath my jacket and crept along my spine. The street lamps flickered uneasily in the wind, casting long, jittery shadows that danced across the cracked pavement like restless ghosts. The sky hung low, heavy with thick clouds that threatened rain, swallowing the moon's pale light. Maple Street smelled like fallen leaves and dry wood smoke. The scent was comforting in a way, the kind of smell that reminded me of simpler times, when Halloween was just about candy and costumes, and the scariest thing was your own imagination. But tonight, something felt different. A low, simmering tension hummed in the air, like static before a storm. I pulled my jacket tighter and glanced over at my friends, Rachel and Marcus. Rachel's pumpkin mask was cracked near the cheek, but her eyes were sharp, darting nervously to every dark corner. Marcus was pretending to be brave, but I could see the way his fingers trembled as he gripped his flashlight. "We should stick to the usual route," Marcus muttered, voice low, like he didn't want to be heard. "No creepy houses." I nodded, but curiosity was gnawing at me. There was one house we'd always avoided, at the end of the block, an old Victorian that looked like it had been forgotten by time. Its paint was peeling, the windows dark and cracked, and the porch sagged as if it might collapse. It was always dark, never a light or decoration. Tonight, I could swear it was different. A single dim porch light flickered weakly, casting strange shadows across the uneven steps. "Let's check it out," I said before I could stop myself. "Just a quick look. We'll be back on the main street in no time." Rachel shook her head, but there was a flicker of curiosity in her eyes too. "I don't like this," she said softly. "I don't either," Marcus added. "But if you want to, I'm not stopping you." We crept down the street, leaves crunching underfoot. Every sound seemed amplified. The distant hoot of an owl, the rustling of leaves, the creak of the old house settling in the cold. My heart pounded louder with each step. At the foot of the porch, a figure emerged from the shadows. My breath caught. He was tall, slouched slightly, dressed in a ragged costume that looked like it had been pieced together from worn-out clothes, too many layers, stained and torn. His mask was the worst part, a cracked clown face, paint-smeared, eyes hollow and unreadable behind it. It wasn't the kind of costume a kid would wear for fun. It was something else, something wrong. "Hey there, kids," he said, voice low and monotone. "Want some candy?" His words were almost robotic, but the bowl he held was large, filled with sweets that gleamed strangely in the flickering light. Too shiny, too perfect. Rachel backed up a step, gripping Marcus's arm. "I don't think we should—" I was already stepping forward, drawn by a mix of fascination and fear. "Sure," I said, voice trembling. "Thanks." He handed me a handful, and the candy felt cold and oddly heavy in my palm. "You kids be careful tonight," he said, tilting his head slowly. "I like to give candy to the ones brave enough to come to my house." A laugh escaped me, shaky and false. "Brave?" I echoed. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned slowly, disappearing into the shadows behind the house. A chill ran through me, not from the cold. "We should go," Rachel said urgently. We turned back toward the street, but the silence was broken by a sound that froze us in place. The crunch of footsteps behind us. Not fast, not chasing, but steady and deliberate. Slow. I glanced back. The man was following us. Panic rose in my throat. "Faster," I whispered, fear gripping every muscle. We broke into a run, darting down alleys and side streets, our breath ragged in the cold air. Every time we glanced back, he was there, just a few steps behind, moving like a shadow that refused to fade. The candy bowl was still clutched in his hands, but something about it seemed wrong, like a trophy or a lure. "Do you think he'll hurt us?" Rachel asked, voice barely audible. "I don't know," I admitted, heart hammering, "but I don't want to find out." The town was nearly silent, most lights extinguished, leaving us exposed under the oppressive darkness. We had no safe place to run to, just the memory of houses filled with warm families and bright pumpkins. Finally, relief came in the form of Mrs. Callahan's headlights, spilling warm light onto the street as she pulled into her driveway. "Help! There's a man following us," I called, voice cracking. She stepped out immediately, peering down the street with sharp, steady eyes. The stranger stopped at the corner, watching us with an unreadable gaze. We sprinted into her yard and crouched behind her car. She reached for her phone, calling the police without hesitation. I watched the man as he lingered for a moment longer, then slowly turned and walked back toward the house, his steps methodical, as if he had been caught but was not defeated. When the officers arrived, they searched the yard and the house. The man was found behind the old gray Victorian, standing motionless, candy bowl still in hand. They questioned him. No weapons, no criminal history, just a man who claimed he liked to hand out candy and see who was brave enough to approach his house. The officers warned us to stay away and keep an eye out, but their words did little to soothe the unease settling deep in my chest. Maple Street never felt the same after that night. The house seemed to watch, its peeling paint and cracked windows hiding secrets no one wanted to uncover. Even in daylight, the shadows stretched too long, creeping farther than the sun's warmth could reach. Every Halloween since, when the wind rattles the windows and the night grows too quiet, I remember those slow, deliberate footsteps behind us, waiting, watching, for the next group foolish enough to come close. Halloween of 2010 was supposed to be just another night of candy, costumes, and harmless thrills. I was 12, small-town naive, and overly confident in my sense of safety. Ever since I could remember, I went trick-or-treating with the same two friends, Jake and Jude. Our school was tiny, the streets well-lit, and crime practically non-existent. We had grown comfortable in our neighborhood, walking alone from house to house since we were 9 or 10. Laughing and joking without a care. That night we dressed in low-effort costumes, me as a ninja, the others in unremarkable disguises. My mom gave me a cell phone to take along, just in case, though none of us had reason to fear anything beyond overexcited neighbors. By 6 o'clock the sun had disappeared behind the horizon, the streets glowing under the lamplights. The town had that crisp, autumn chill, and the trees whispered in the wind as if warning us of something we couldn't yet understand. The trick-or-treating was normal at first. We moved in neat rows along the streets, collecting candy, joking about who had the best haul. That's when I noticed the car. It was slow, deliberate, almost lurking, moving past us like a predator. In the driver's seat was a single man, dressed in a clown costume so extravagant it looked professional. His makeup was smudged, partially wiped away, giving him a grotesque, unsettling appearance. He stared at us for what felt like an eternity, a cold, calculating gaze that pinned me to the spot. Then he turned down a side street, disappearing from sight. Jake and I exchanged uneasy glances, but we said nothing. We kept going, the unease growing with each step. By 8:30, most houses had extinguished their lights. The night was winding down, but we weren't ready to go home. Our parents wouldn't check on us until at least 9:30, so we decided to linger, dig into our candy, and enjoy the lingering Halloween magic. I suggested we wander to the school playground. The streets were still lined with lampposts, but the school itself was dark, silent, and foreboding. Entering through the gate, the shadows swallowed us whole. Only after our eyes adjusted did we spot the basketball courts, the lone bench where we sat to talk and laugh a little. 10 minutes passed, and then Jude froze. "There's someone coming," he whispered. A tall figure approached through the dim shadows, the night amplifying every detail. At first, I hoped it was a late parent or older kid, but the figure's height alone, easily 6'2", made my heart seize. And then I recognized it, the same clown from earlier, the one in the car. His face was smeared with white makeup, grotesque and uneven, and though he wore no wig or hat, the rest of his body was fully costumed. Oversized shoes, baggy, colorful suit, gloves. We didn't speak. Our breaths became shallow, our muscles locked. The clown smiled, or at least attempted a smile. His teeth were crooked, the expression stiff, as if his face didn't quite remember how to make the shape. "Hey guys," he said, his voice oddly casual. "How's it going?" We stayed silent. My phone vibrated in my pocket, silent mode, but I could feel the call coming through. I ignored it, eyes glued to the clown's unnatural presence. "I have a lot of candy left over from a party," he continued, pointing to a car parked near the school. "Come with me and you can have some." Then he started to hum, slowly, off-key. The tune was familiar. "Trick or treat, and watch your back." It was a dumb chant Jake had been singing earlier in the night, something we'd made up years ago. We hadn't said it loud, barely above a whisper, really. So how did he know it? Instinct screamed at me. This was wrong. All of it was wrong. But I was frozen, unsure whether to run or reason. Then Jude acted. Without warning, he sprinted in the opposite direction, adrenaline and instinct taking over. Jake and I followed, hearts pounding, eyes darting back to the clown. He didn't chase at first, just walked, each step deliberate, his massive shoes thudding against the pavement in a haunting rhythm. We reached the back fence of the playground, hesitated only for a moment, and climbed over into the woods behind the school. The forest was dense, the trees stretching high, their shadows forming eerie shapes that moved with the wind. Our breath came out in clouds, fogging in the cold air as we pushed through branches and underbrush. Every crackle of leaves behind us made my stomach twist. The clown followed, not running, but always walking, never far behind. We could hear the rhythm of those heavy shoes, thud, 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 and still, that humming, that broken, childish chant. When we finally reached the street on the far side of the woods, we burst into the open like hunted animals. Relief flooded through me, though fear lingered like ice in my veins. I checked my phone. 5 missed calls. Texts from my mom, all in screaming caps. "Come home now." We didn't speak. We just ran. I remember my lungs burning, the pavement under my sneakers pounding in rhythm with my heartbeat. Jake veered off first, toward his house. Jude followed suit. I took the final corner alone, my neighborhood suddenly foreign. Every shadow on every lawn twisted, unnatural. When I reached home, my mom was already at the door. Her face was pale and wet with tears, arms outstretched like she'd been waiting to catch me. She pulled me inside and locked the door behind us with a shaky hand. Police cruisers were scattered across the block. Blue and red lights flashed in the windows like alarm bells. A woman screamed from a few houses down. Someone else's mother, someone else's fear made real. I told the officers everything. The clown, the car, the offer of candy. They listened, their pens scratching paper as I tried to recall details. I mentioned the way he smiled, off-kilter, like he'd forgotten how, and the humming, that awful wrong humming, That night I barely slept. My mom sat outside my room in a folding chair, as if her presence could block nightmares from creeping in. But they came anyway. Visions of smeared makeup, of footsteps that never rushed but always followed, of that voice, that tune, our tune. The next morning, the town was buzzing. A younger kid had been approached near the school by the same clown. The man tried to coax him toward a car, just like he had with us. The child's mother intervened in time. The clown vanished again. They never caught him. Halloween changed after that. No one trick-or-treated alone. No one stayed out past dark. Some people stopped celebrating altogether. My friends and I? We never spoke much about that night again. But I know we all carry it. That moment when innocence cracked and something else, something colder, slipped in. Even now, I can't see a clown on TV or hear a Halloween jingle without freezing inside. Because I remember his smile. And worse, I remember the sound of him humming our song. Every October, Hollow Creek Haunt appeared like a ghost at the edge of our county, transforming a stretch of farmland and bordering woods into a carnival of terror. Some locals swore it simply materialized overnight. Fog rolling over cornfields, lanterns flickering along the trail, and the sharp smell of smoke and burnt sugar drifting across the parking lot. I'd been going every year with my friends, Rod, James, and Bud. Bud wasn't his real name. None of us remembered it half the time, but the nickname had stuck through middle school dares and high school pranks. We were in our late teens, perfectly reckless, craving the thrill of fear disguised as entertainment. Hollow Creek Haunt was our yearly ritual, and we weren't about to miss it. The drive itself was a mix of banter and tension. Rod, ever the show-off, kept teasing James about being too cautious, while Bud and I laughed, trying to convince ourselves we weren't nervous. Last year, I swear that guy in the clown mask looked right at me when the strobe went off, I said, feeling a shiver down my spine despite the warmth of the car. James snorted. Or maybe you were just seeing things. You're always half panicked before we even get there. Bud adjusted his scarf, eyes darting to the darkened cornfields outside the window. I don't know. Something about those woods feels wrong this year, he muttered. Rod rolled his eyes. You're always scared, man. It's just a haunted trail. But as we drove closer, the fog rolling over the fields seemed almost unnatural. Lanterns flickered along the entrance path, casting long, fractured shadows. The smell of smoke mixed with something faintly sweet, like burnt sugar, drifted in the night air. Even Rod fell silent, and I felt my stomach tighten. The haunted house was predictably chaotic. Dark hallways, fog machines, actors in clown masks, fake blood, and strobe lights that made the walls and our reflections blur. The first few rooms were laughable. The fourth room made me jump when a skeleton swung from the ceiling at chest height. Bud shrieked, grabbing my arm. "Relax! It's fake!" I said, though my own voice cracked. Rod elbowed me. "Yeah, but it's funny scary, not oh shit, what's that scary?" James kept muttering under his breath, counting steps between scares, trying to keep control. I realized then that our group dynamic itself heightened the tension. Rod's bravado, James's caution, Bud's constant anxiety, and my own half-hearted attempts at bravery. By the time we stumbled back into the cold October night, our adrenaline had shifted to a low, nervous hum. We joked and laughed, but every shadow and flicker of light felt sharper, as if the night itself were alive. The corn maze loomed like a pale fortress of stalks under the lantern light. Shoulder high and brittle, the dry corn rustled softly in the wind, whispering secrets we couldn't hear. The entrance arch, draped in fake spiderwebs, seemed innocent enough, but a chill ran down my spine as I stepped inside. At first, it was tame. Dead ends, turns, more dead ends. We teased each other about who would get lost first, joking to keep nerves at bay. Then the scarecrow appeared, burlap mask sewn shut at the mouth, straw jutting from sleeves and pants, arms flailing, and a guttural scream that cut through the night. My legs moved before my brain could catch up. Chaos erupted. We scattered. The maze became a labyrinth of panic. Paths twisted endlessly. Lanterns flickered unpredictably, and the rustle of corn stalks seemed almost sentient. I realized I was alone. Rod, James, Bud, they had vanished. Then came the movement, subtle at first, 10 feet ahead, crouched, waiting. I froze. A hand shot out of the stalks and clamped around my wrist. Pain lanced up my arm. "Stop! You're hurting me!" I yelled, wrenching free. The figure stepped into the lantern light. Black coat, black jeans, black gloves, faceless mask, completely blank. No eyes, no mouth, just nothing. My stomach tightened. He tilted his head slightly, then he ran. Branches whipped my face, roots clawed at my sneakers. Panic surged in waves, my heart hammering like a drum. I twisted around a dead end, nearly tripping over a root. The crunch of dry corn stalks sounded deafening. Minutes stretched like hours. I stumbled into a small clearing, heart hammering, lungs burning. My phone buzzed, a notification I didn't check. Footsteps echoed from somewhere in the maze, closer. Then, silence. I ran again, zigzagging through the stalks, until I finally burst from the maze at the far edge. Lantern light met my eyes, and a staff member stared in disbelief. "We don't have anyone in that costume," he said, brow furrowed. "But I'll check with the actors." I followed the trail reluctantly. Fog machines draped the path in low-lying mist, speakers playing hollow, distorted Halloween music. Shadows danced unnaturally between the trees. The crunch of fallen leaves under my shoes sounded amplified, echoing in my ears. Then he appeared. Motionless, a black silhouette blocking the path. My stomach dropped, and then he ran. Branches whipped my face. Roots tore at my shoes. I screamed, "Police!" though I knew no one could hear. The adrenaline burned through my veins, every step powered by pure instinct. I dove behind a tree. Footsteps crunched closer. My phone buzzed again. I silenced it. The footsteps stopped. Nothing. Then, slam. He shoved me against the ground. Dirt sprayed my face. Pain shot across my back. I scrambled to my feet, sprinting toward the trail. When I glanced back, he had vanished. Finally, I reached the front office, voice trembling, chest heaving. The manager listened gravely. "None of our actors wear that," he said. "We'll call the police." By the time my friends found me, officers were searching the woods. I had no bruises, no proof, only my word. Hollow Creek shut down for the night. Silence hung over the drive home, heavier than the October air. Weeks later, rumors spread. Others had seen faceless figures in the maze and trail, stalking visitors, always vanishing when approached. Some whispered Hollow Creek only appeared to those it chose. Months later, I still couldn't go near haunted attractions. The thought alone tightened my chest. Sometimes, I felt eyes watching me in ordinary places, parking lots, alleys, empty fields. Because sometimes, the monsters you run from aren't wearing masks. And sometimes, they follow you home, waiting for the next October night. I was 13, and that night should have been perfect. My friends and I had spent hours trick-or-treating, savoring what we all knew might be the last time we could do it together before getting too old. We lived within a few streets of each other, so we walked each other home, laughing, comparing candy, joking about the scariest houses, and daring each other to knock on the spookiest doors. The night air was crisp, and the smell of fallen leaves mixed with faint traces of smoke from nearby chimneys. It all felt like the quintessential Halloween. I was the last one left, walking alone after dropping Jackie off. She had offered for me to stay the night, but I knew my mom expected me home. Our small town didn't fuss over kids being out alone, especially on Halloween, so I had a little leeway. My curfew was usually 9, but on Halloween it extended to 10. The street was dimly lit, the orange glow from old streetlights barely cutting through the darkness. Shadows stretched across cracked pavement, twisted by the wind that rustled dry leaves. I tightened my grip on my bag of candy, each wrapper crinkling under my hand. That's when I first heard it, a low, guttural growl coming from the overgrown bushes along the sidewalk. My pulse quickened. My stomach twisted. I slowed at first, trying to convince myself it was probably a raccoon or some stray cat. But the growl persisted. Then came the bark, low and menacing. My fast walk became a sprint. Branches snapped behind me. The sound wasn't fading, it was gaining. My bravery crumbled, replaced by pure panic. I imagined my dad appearing in a flash, or the street suddenly filling with neighbors. But there was nothing. Only me, the night, and the sound of pursuit. At the end of the road, I saw it. A massive dog, eyes glowing faintly in the dim light, teeth bared, muscles tense. Maybe a pit bull, but far bigger than any dog I'd seen in my life. Its gaze locked on me, focused, unrelenting. My heart slammed against my ribs as I froze for a split second, enough time for it to size me up. We shared a moment of recognition, two living creatures locked in instinctual understanding. I screamed, backing away slowly, hoping fear alone might make it hesitate. It didn't. With terrifying agility, it leapt over a low fence and charged. Instinct took over. I scrambled onto a nearby car, clinging to the roof, feeling the cold metal bite into my palms. My cape flapped wildly, obstructing my view. The dog leapt along the side, nails scraping against the metal. The car shook slightly under its weight. My lungs screamed, my legs burned, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't lose. Then it discovered the truck bed beside the car. In a blur, it jumped in. I slid off the roof and landed hard on the pavement, rolling to avoid scraping my elbows. Pain shot through my side, but adrenaline drowned it out. I yanked my cape from my neck, flinging it at the dog in a desperate attempt to slow it down. It missed entirely. Ahead, a large oak tree caught my eye, my only chance. I sprinted, adrenaline giving me unnatural speed, and scrambled up as fast as I could. Feet searching for grips, hands digging into bark, I clawed higher until I was 10 feet off the ground. The dog lunged at the base but couldn't reach me. I perched on a thick branch, trembling, candy bag clutched to my chest like a lifeline. Time stretched, minutes passed, or maybe seconds. I could hear the dog pacing below, growling, snapping, muscles coiled for another leap. I had to think. Jumping down and running wouldn't work. It was faster, stronger. I scanned the surrounding houses and spotted a backyard across a fence, a faint light glowing from a bedroom window. A desperate plan formed. I bundled my candy into a tight ball and hurled it at the window. Glass shattered. A muffled scream and frantic voices came from inside. The dog, startled and distracted by the commotion, ran toward the noise. My window of opportunity was small, but it was enough. I climbed down the tree, landing lightly despite the strain on my legs, and sprinted for home. My legs burned, lungs screamed, but I didn't slow down. Adrenaline carried me. I dodged mailboxes, jumped over fallen branches, and barely noticed the cold wind cutting my face. I made it home just under 5 minutes later. Cop cars lined the street. My parents were outside, panic written across their faces. They'd noticed I was missing and called the police. Between gasps for air, I recounted the night, the chase, the dog, and the shattered window. The police checked the neighborhood, but the dog was gone. Homeowners reported it had run off unharmed. My parents had to deal with the property damage and the chaos it caused. I never saw that dog again, and honestly, part of me was relieved. It wasn't the dog's fault, it was the owner's. That night left a mark. It wasn't some lesson about caution or fear. It was raw, chaotic survival, a memory of panic and adrenaline that I still recall vividly. And that tree? It saved me. Even now, every Halloween when I walk the streets with friends, I find myself glancing over my shoulder, just in case something unexpected is waiting in the shadows. Halloween on a boat hadn't seemed like the best idea, but my boyfriend had been adamant. I've never been good at saying no, especially to him. I tried to imagine enjoying the night, dancing, music, costumes, but the thought of squeezing into an itchy outfit made me tense. Still, I figured I could grin and bear it for him. I had no idea just how badly the night would spiral. We arrived at the docks about 30 minutes early. The line was already snaking along the pier, illuminated by strings of orange and purple lights. The boat swayed gently against the dock, packed with people laughing, shouting, and waving tickets. As soon as I stepped onto the deck, A pang of anxiety shot through me. The crowd was chaotic, drunk, and overwhelmingly loud. People jostled past me, some tripping over each other, others shouting into phones or across the deck. My boyfriend vanished immediately, swallowed by his friends. I forced myself to a corner table, shrinking inward, wishing the ground would open up and swallow me. The boat slowly pulled away from the dock. The coastline faded, leaving only black water and distant wavering lights. I should have felt thrilled, maybe even a little excited. But instead, the motion of the boat made my stomach lurch. The music blared from large speakers, a mixture of top hits and cheesy Halloween tracks. But I couldn't lose myself in it. The air smelled thick, alcohol, sweat, spilled beer, and something metallic faintly bitter. The chaos pressed in from every side, yet I felt utterly alone. I watched couples and groups move past me, laughing and leaning into one another. My boyfriend occasionally glanced back, a small grin on his face, before disappearing again. I hated being ignored, yet the thought of drawing attention to myself in the chaos made my anxiety spike. I reminded myself I was here for him, and maybe that was enough, at least for now. Then the music cut out. The boat shuddered slightly, and the lights flickered before going completely dark. At first, people laughed, assuming this was part of the Halloween theatrics. A wave of murmurs followed, confusion spreading through the crowd. I stood up, straining to see through the darkness, but the glow sticks people clutched barely pierced the black. Panic began to creep in. I could hear nervous laughter, some shouting questions, and the occasional terrified whimper. A crew member passed me, shrugging helplessly, his eyes wide. The captain's voice finally came through the PA, calm but strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing engine trouble. We are attempting to contact the Coast Guard. Please remain calm." The words should have been comforting, but they weren't. The temperature dropped sharply, wind slicing across the deck. I pulled my jacket tighter, hugging my arms, wishing desperately I had stayed home. Hours felt like minutes, and minutes felt like hours. My mind raced, imagining every possible disaster. Drifting into open water, a sudden storm, someone falling overboard. Then I felt him. Someone sat beside me, pressing uncomfortably close. He smelled of cheap whiskey, the stench of alcohol cutting through the crisp night air. "Why are you sitting all alone?" he slurred. His arm brushed mine, lingering. I froze. I'm fine," I whispered, hoping he would leave. He didn't. Instead, he grabbed my wrist roughly, yanking me down hard. Pain shot through my tailbone as I hit the metal deck. "You're staying with me tonight," he growled. The shadows distorted his face, making him seem bigger, more monstrous than he likely was. Fear rooted me to the spot, but somewhere deep, a spark of survival lit up. I tried calling for help, but voices were scattered, muffled, and panicked themselves. My boyfriend appeared a few feet away, reaching toward me, but the darkness made his intentions unreadable. For a terrifying second, I wondered if he even realized what was happening, if he was frozen by confusion or disbelief. That hesitation felt worse than any physical threat. I forced myself to think. Panic surged, but logic followed. The rear of the boat, the women's restroom, safety, light, some measure of control. I shoved through the crowd, every bump and collision amplifying my terror. People's faces glowed eerily under flickering emergency lights. Some laughed nervously, some cried quietly. No one stopped to help, and I couldn't blame them. Everyone was caught in their own fear. I reached the restroom, heart hammering, and gasped as another woman emerged from the shadows. She froze for a second at my disheveled state. I tried to explain, words spilling over each other, tears blurring my vision. The man followed immediately, barging in without hesitation. My heart stopped. But then, unexpectedly, the woman acted. She lunged, grabbing him, and another appeared, and suddenly, he was pinned. Sounds of struggling, grunts, and sharp commands filled the room. The chaos outside faded into a background hum as adrenaline took over. Minutes, or was it hours, later, the lights flickered back on. The man lay bruised and defeated on the floor, The restroom a scene of violent struggle. Gasps echoed around the boat as phones were raised to dial emergency services. Within the hour, the Coast Guard arrived, along with police. People were escorted back to the docks, shaking, relieved, exhausted. At the station, recounting my experience was surreal. Witnesses, including the brave women who intervened, testified. The legal outcomes were secondary in my mind. The terror, the helplessness, the lingering uncertainty, that was what I carried. I broke up with my boyfriend days later. I could never tell if his hesitation that night was fear, disbelief, or just confusion, but the doubt lingered. Halloween is no longer just costumes and candy. Now, every time I hear about a boat trip, a crowded party, or a sudden blackout, a chill runs through me. I survived, but the fear remains, like a shadow that never leaves. Halloween of 2019 should have been just another quiet night in our small Australian suburb, but from the moment the storm rolled in, I knew something was off. Rain lashed against the windows, wind twisting branches into frantic shapes that scratched at the sides of the house. Every distant clap of thunder made my chest tighten. Normally, I loved Halloween. The flicker of jack-o'-lanterns, the smell of pumpkin spice, the excuse to watch horror movies alone. But tonight, the familiar comfort felt fragile, almost like it could be torn away. I sank into the couch. The Conjuring. Too murmuring from the TV, but my mind kept drifting. Remember last year, I thought, when only 2 kids came by? And the year before, it was just the cat chasing shadows on the lawn? My parents ignored the decorations I'd spent hours setting up. That's fine, I didn't need them. But tonight, the house felt wrong, too silent, too empty. Each creak of the floorboards sounded like someone walking right behind me. Around 7:30, my phone buzzed. A message from M. Anyone want to mess around and go trick-or-treating? A laugh escaped me, brittle and nervous. No one goes out anymore, do they? But maybe, just maybe, a little adventure would break the monotony. S, C, and H replied immediately, their enthusiasm masking the same uneasy curiosity I felt. We asked M where to meet. Strangely, he replied that he couldn't actually come, but he knew of a house nearby that always had heaps of candy. Something about it felt off, but the promise of sweets and the storm-soaked thrill was too tempting. By 8:15, the 4 of us were standing outside the house he'd mentioned. The street glistened under the storm, slick with rain, leaves sticking to our shoes. The house was large, almost impossibly perfect for Halloween. A pumpkin bowl overflowing with candy sat on the porch, glowing faintly in the dim orange light. No lights were on inside, no cars in the drive, no sign of life. Even the wind seemed to hesitate here, whispering around corners instead of tearing at the trees. I felt a prickle on the back of my neck, the kind that told me something wasn't right. Maybe we shouldn't, H began, but S cut him off with a nervous grin. Come on, it's just candy. We grabbed handfuls, careful to leave some behind, and turned to leave. That's when we saw them. 2 clowns walked slowly up the driveway. Their costumes weren't cheap. The wigs were wild, the paint immaculate, and their smiles impossible. One even wore red contacts that made his eyes glow in the dim light. Their heads tilted in unison, following our movements like puppets with a will of their own. The silence around them amplified the storm's roar, creating a bizarre, surreal stillness. Let's go, S whispered. Before we could move a step, one clown honked a rubber nose. Squeak. The sound shattered the night, louder than any thunderclap. Panic seized me. We bolted. Bags of candy bounced against our sides as we ran down the street. My lungs burned, hearts hammering. Behind us, heavy footsteps pounded the pavement. Every so often, a flash of white face or the glint of red eyes appeared in the shadows. C stumbled over a curb. I can't, she gasped, but H grabbed her arm, pulling her upright. Keep moving, he yelled, voice trembling. I dared a glance back. One clown's grin stretched wider than humanly possible. My stomach dropped. This isn't a prank. This isn't Halloween fun. Fear clung to me like wet clothes. We darted down side streets, rain stinging our faces, leaves crunching underfoot. S whispered something incomprehensible between ragged breaths. I think they knew. I froze. Of course. Someone had used M's phone to lure us. The realization hit me like a punch. We were being hunted, guided by our own friend's identity. Finally, the clown's pursuit faded, the storm swallowing their echoes, leaving only our ragged breaths and the rhythmic tapping of rain. We huddled together, disbelief etched into every face. We ran to M's house. He opened the door, eyes wide. "You told us to go trick-or-treating," I snapped. "What? No, I lost my phone this morning," he said, confusion spreading across his features. The silence that followed was heavy, oppressive. Someone had taken advantage of the storm, the night, and M's missing phone. And that someone, or something, had been waiting for us. Back in my room by 9:30, I tried to refocus on the movie, but every flicker of lightning reminded me of those painted faces, of the way the clowns had stared straight at us. When the credits rolled, I went to collect the pumpkin bowl outside, only to freeze. It was empty, every piece of candy gone. At the bottom, a single clown nose. My hands shook as I picked it up. My parents dismissed it as a prank by neighborhood kids, but I couldn't sleep. At 1 a.m., I awoke to soft tap-tap-tap at my bedroom window. Pebbles hitting glass. My stomach dropped. Slowly, I pulled the blinds aside. My Halloween decorations had been shredded, scattered across the lawn like confetti. Then something small smacked the glass, a lollipop, and that's when I saw them. 2 clowns crouched on the neighbor's roof, staring down at me. Their white faces gleamed faintly in the moonlight, smiles fixed and wide, like wax figures. One raised a hand and gave a slow, deliberate wave. I screamed and ran straight into my parents' room. The police were called, but by the time they arrived, the clowns were gone. Officers searched the abandoned house we'd been lured to, finding only M's missing phone. The next day at school, my friends recounted similar experiences. Rocks thrown at their houses, shadows darting past windows. I don't know if the clowns had followed us or tracked us using the stolen phone. But every year since, as October comes to an end, I can't shake the feeling that they'll return. Halloween, my favorite holiday, has never felt safe again. I still remember that Halloween night like it was yesterday. I was 22 at the time, freshly graduated and trying to settle into a new town for my first real job. Everything felt unfamiliar. The streets, the accents, even the way people celebrated holidays. I hadn't built much of a social circle yet, so when a coworker casually invited me to a Halloween party, I jumped at the chance. The address was on the outskirts of town, an old Victorian house with a reputation I hadn't yet heard about. My coworker Mike mentioned it belonged to a friend of a friend and that the place had history. He said it with a smirk, like it was a selling point. I threw together a makeshift zombie costume, some ripped jeans, fake blood, and chalky makeup. It wasn't impressive, but I wasn't trying to win awards. I just wanted to meet people. As I drove out past the town center, streetlights grew sparse. By the time I reached the house, the only illumination came from flickering jack-o'-lanterns lining the porch and the faint glow of colored bulbs strung across the yard. The house itself looked like it had been plucked out of a Gothic novel. Its steep roof loomed over me, windows tall and narrow, shutters hanging loose on rusted hinges. The front steps groaned as I climbed them, and the faint hum of bass shook the glass panes in the door. Inside, it was chaos. Music pounded, people shouted over one another, and the air smelled of beer, smoke, and artificial fog from a cheap machine set up in the corner. I recognized a handful of faces from work, but most were strangers. Some wore elaborate costumes, others had clearly come just to drink. I forced a smile, made small talk where I could, but the energy in the room felt off. Everyone seemed louder than necessary, their laughter too sharp, as if covering up some underlying tension I couldn't name. After a couple of hours, my social battery was drained. I needed air. Slipping out the back door, I found myself in a yard that stretched into shadow. A few candles sat on tables, their flames guttering in the breeze. Beyond the reach of the light stood an old swing set, its chains rusted, one seat hanging askew. Drawn to it, I sat down, letting the creak of metal and the cool October wind settle my nerves. That's when I heard the footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, crunching across the patchy grass. A figure emerged from the dark. A girl in a white dress, her face covered by a cheap plastic mask. She didn't speak at first, just moved toward the swing beside me and sat down with unnatural grace. The chains squeaked, though her movements were slow and controlled. "Hey there," I said, trying to sound casual. My voice wavered. She tilted her head slightly. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "Do you believe in spirits?" I chuckled nervously. "Not really. Just here for the party." Her head tilted the other way. The mask's hollow eyes caught the candlelight, and for a moment, it looked like they were staring straight into me. "This house is haunted," she said. "A girl disappeared here. They say she still comes back, looking for her friends." My stomach knotted, though I tried to play along. "What happened to her?" "No one knows," she whispered, almost mournfully. "But she never left." Silence stretched between us. The distant thump of music from inside suddenly seemed muted, as if the house itself had grown farther away. Then she stood. Her movements were fluid, too fluid, like she was floating more than walking. She raised one pale arm and pointed toward the far corner of the yard. "There," she said. I followed her gaze. An old oak tree loomed, its bark gnarled and split, branches like skeletal arms clawing at the sky. A shiver ran through me. I turned to ask her what she meant, but she was gone. Not walking away, not fading into the dark, just gone. The swing beside me was still moving, swaying gently as if she'd only just left. I stood quickly, my chest tight. The air had changed. The faint sounds of the party were gone, replaced by an eerie stillness that pressed against my ears. I forced myself to look back at the house. The glowing string lights flickered, and then, almost like a trick of the eye, the whole place seemed different. Darker. Wrong. The windows were black, the music silenced. My skin prickled as dread crept up my spine. I rushed to the back door and pushed it open. The warm chaos I'd left behind was gone. Instead, I stepped into a hollowed-out shell of the party. The furniture was overturned, streamers torn, half-empty cups shattered across the floor. No people, no sound. "Hello?" My voice cracked. No answer. The door behind me slammed shut with such force that the glass rattled. My heart pounded. I stumbled forward, tripping over an overturned chair. My instinct screamed at me to run, but where? A giggle echoed faintly down the hall. I froze. "Who's there?" My voice trembled. No reply. Only the sound of something, or someone, moving in the shadows just out of sight. I forced myself down the hall, my breath shallow. From the corner of my eye, I caught a flicker of movement. A pale figure darting past an open doorway. I spun, but the room was empty. The air felt heavier now, the silence broken only by the occasional creak of the old house. Panic clawed at me. I had to get out. I stumbled toward the front of the house, but the door wouldn't budge. It felt as if something held it shut from the other side. My pulse roared in my ears. Then, that same giggle, closer now. I spun around. Down the hallway, a shape lingered in the shadows. The girl in the white dress, mask glinting, still, watching. My throat tightened. "What do you want?" She didn't move. Then, slowly, she raised a hand and beckoned. Her whisper slithered into my ears, though her lips didn't move. "Stay with us." That broke me. I bolted down another hallway, desperate for escape. Door after door opened into rooms filled with debris, dust, and silence. Finally, at the end of one narrow hall, I spotted a window. I charged for it, fumbling with the latch, shoving it open. Cold air hit my face as I climbed out, falling hard onto the ground below. I scrambled to my feet, lungs burning. The night was silent again, the house looming behind me like a tombstone. And then, movement. In the upstairs window, framed by the moonlight, she stood, the girl in the white dress, watching. Her voice drifted down, carried on the breeze, though her mask never moved. "See you next year." I didn't wait. I sprinted for my car, keys shaking in my hands. The engine roared to life, and I peeled away, gravel spitting from the tires. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away, back in the glow of streetlights, surrounded by the normal noise of town. But even now, years later, every Halloween I think about that house. I wonder if anyone else hears the whispers, sees the girl in the white mask, or feels that oppressive silence swallowing the night. And I wonder if someday she'll come looking for me again. All changed last October. I've never liked Halloween much. I tolerated it, not out of joy, but out of necessity. The street had its traditions, loud decorations, candy giveaways, and the occasional prank. But I valued my peace and privacy more than candy or costumes. For years, I made that clear. No trick-or-treaters, no exceptions. A small sign hung by my door, plain and direct. For years, it worked. 2021? Fine. 2022? Fine. Last year, though, everything fell apart. I remember the first knock like it was a hammer striking glass. Around 6:30 p.m., a sharp tap came at the door. I peeked through the blinds and froze. A group of kids stood there in cheap Marvel costumes. Their painted smiles were far too wide, their heads tilted unnaturally, like something out of a nightmare. The oldest looked 12, maybe 13. Their voices, perfectly synchronized, shouted, "Trick or treat!" as though rehearsed in some secret rehearsal room. I opened the door. "I don't do Halloween," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Go home." The Iron Man kid tilted his head, confusion etched into his painted mask. I tried joking, explaining the inaccuracies in his suit, the wrong arc reactor color, the movies versus the comics. I expected them to roll their eyes and leave. Instead, they stared at me blankly, like I was speaking another language. I slammed the door. My hands shook. My chest tightened. I sank to the floor by my computer, headphones on, trying to drown the pounding of my heart with music and games. 10 minutes later, another knock. The same kids. "You know we got a trick for you, right?" the Iron Man kid said, grinning. I froze, a cold spike running down my spine. I told them firmly to leave, threatening to call their parents, and slammed the door again. My anxiety spiked. I tried breathing exercises, but my mind raced with worst-case scenarios. Were they planning to break in? Were there more of them I hadn't seen? Then a third knock. This time, a woman appeared behind them. Probably a parent, alarmed, trying to intervene. I opened the door and saw something that made my blood run cold. My sign was gone. Stolen. They had taken my no trick-or-treat sign, the one that had kept my peace intact for years. Rage and fear collided in my chest. I replaced it with a bigger, brighter version in the window, fully visible, impossible to remove without climbing through the glass. The night dragged on, and every sound outside made me jump. Leaves rustling, the wind brushing against the house. Even the distant hum of a car sent my nerves into overdrive. Every loose paving stone clicked under the slightest weight, echoing in my ears from the kitchen window. I put on my sneakers, quietly crept to the back door. My eyes scanned the yard. And then I saw him, the Iron Man kid, standing frozen on the grass. For a moment, terror was mutual. I didn't touch him, didn't need to. The fear radiating from him mirrored my own. "Get off my property," I shouted, my voice echoing against the houses. "This is private. You do not belong here." They scattered like startled birds. I double-checked every corner of the yard, replaced the stolen sign, and fortified my space with lights, motion sensors, and a hidden camera. Finally, I could breathe. Or at least, I thought I could. But the night wasn't over. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind, every distant thump set my heart racing. My mind spun through all possible scenarios. Another intruder. Someone waiting for me to relax my guard? My house no longer felt like mine. Hours later, I heard it again. Soft footsteps on the loose stones near the gate. I gripped my blanket, frozen. My mind jumped to every potential threat. Were they back? Had they brought reinforcements? I crept to the window. A shadow flitted past. My stomach dropped. I bolted to the back door, flung it open, and there he was again, the Iron Man kid, frozen in pure fear, mirroring the terror I'd felt. "You will leave now," I barked. "And stay away." He bolted. I watched until his small frame disappeared into the darkness, swallowed by the quiet night. My heart thudded violently in my chest. I checked the yard, every corner, every bush, every tree. Nothing remained. I locked the door, sliding the deadbolt with trembling hands. I sat down in the dark, trying to calm my breathing. But every sound, every shadow, reminded me of their audacity. I replayed the events on loop. How dare they ignore my rules? How dare they disrespect my space? How dare ordinary people feel entitled to violate my sanctuary? Sleep came only in fitful bursts. Dreams were filled with small shadows that moved independently. Tiny hands pressing against doors and windows, and whispers that weren't there when I woke. The next morning, the aftermath was grotesque in its subtlety. Eggshells splattered across my windowsill. Tiny footprints pressed into the grass. Crushed leaves marked their path. Nothing monstrous in appearance, yet the sense of violation was physical. I fortified my space even further. 2 signs. Motion-activated lights. Cameras strategically hidden in shrubs. I patrolled every corner of my yard, every entry point into the house. My paranoia grew like a second skin. Weeks later, the signs of intrusion didn't stop. A toy left on the porch, a candy wrapper under a bush, a faint chalk mark on the driveway. Nothing overtly threatening, but enough to let me know they had returned silently, unseen. I didn't leave the house on Halloween after that. I waited. I watched, quietly, nervously, hoping each year would be calmer, yet fearing it never would be. The lesson was clear. The scariest monsters don't wear costumes. They wear entitlement, ignorance, and the belief that someone else's rules do not apply to them. And the memory of that night, of the trespassers in my yard, of the stolen sign and relentless audacity, will stay with me forever. Even now, when a leaf scratches against a window, or a shadow moves in the corner of my vision, my pulse spikes. Because ordinary people, I've learned, can be the most terrifying monsters of all. Halloween had always carried a peculiar kind of magic, a restless blend of excitement, dread, and something unnameable lurking beneath the surface. By the time I reached 8th grade, my group of friends felt like we had finally outgrown trick-or-treating. 10 straight years of costumes, candy, and running from house to house had dulled the thrill. For most of my friends, Halloween that year meant sitting at home, handing out candy to younger kids, or binge-watching spooky movies. But Tyler and I weren't most kids. Sitting in a dimly lit living room and watching TV felt like a punishment. We wanted adventure. Anything. That afternoon, I pedaled over to Tyler's house, my backpack bouncing against my shoulders. He had a glint in his eye, that dangerous spark of curiosity that always meant trouble. "I heard about something," he said, lowering his voice. "A tunnel. Or maybe a mine. I don't know exactly. It's supposed to be abandoned, way out in the woods, south of town. No one goes there." I felt my pulse spike. Abandoned tunnels were dangerous, mysterious, thrilling. It didn't matter that we'd never explored anything like it. That was exactly why we wanted to. Tyler had directions from a friend of a friend, and soon we were armed with a single flashlight, 2 bikes, and a sense of nervous excitement. The streets were full of families and trick-or-treaters, the air thick with the smell of candy and autumn leaves. But as we pedaled past the last houses, the crowd thinned, and the distant laughter faded. By the time we reached the woods, the noise disappeared entirely, leaving only an unsettling, unnatural silence. We locked our bikes to a gnarled tree at the forest's edge and followed a narrow, overgrown path. It was obvious no one maintained it. Twisting roots snagged our shoes, fallen branches clawed at our legs, and the mud slowed our progress. Every rustle made me jump. Every shadow seemed alive. After nearly 40 minutes, we emerged into a small clearing. There it was, partially hidden by overgrown vegetation, a jagged hole cut into the side of a hill. Darkness swallowed the entrance whole. The flashlight seemed insignificant against it. "This is it," Tyler whispered, voice trembling with awe and fear. I stayed close as he stepped forward. The beam of light carved a narrow path along the rough rock walls, illuminating clouds of dust that swirled around us like restless spirits. The tunnel seemed endless, and an icy draft carried the scent of damp stone and decayed leaves, clinging to my lungs with every breath. Before stepping inside, I glanced back at the forest path we had traversed. For a fleeting moment, I thought I saw movement, a shadow slipping behind the trees. My stomach dropped. I whispered to Tyler, and he swung the flashlight toward it. But nothing was there. Perhaps my eyes were playing tricks. Perhaps the wind had shifted. Either way, stepping into the tunnel felt like crossing a line. Tyler led the way, and I followed, every step kicking up clouds of dust. The echo of our footsteps bounced off the walls, stretching into an unnerving resonance that made the tunnel feel infinitely long. The air grew heavier the deeper we went, almost suffocating. My hands brushed against slick moss and jagged stone. Cobwebs clung to my hair and scraped my skin. A distant drip of water fell with irregular rhythm, like a slow, deliberate heartbeat. Then we heard it. A voice, soft, indistinct, and unmistakably human, echoed through the tunnel. It carried no words we could recognize, yet its presence pressed against our senses like a tangible weight. Tyler froze, holding the flashlight steady. We exchanged glances, silent agreement passing between us. We had gone far enough. But as we turned to leave, a faint scraping sound came from deeper in the darkness. Not animal, not natural. Something deliberate. Shadows shifted at the corner of my eye. Every instinct screamed at me to run. We did. The tunnel seemed to stretch longer than before, each step echoing like we were running through miles of stone. I felt the air grow colder, heavier, almost suffocating, as if the tunnel itself were alive and unwilling to let us go. The whispers behind us grew louder, layered, almost chanting, though still just out of comprehension. My heart hammered so hard I feared it might burst, every nerve on edge. When we finally burst into the clearing, the night air hit like a jolt of electricity. Relief should have come, but it was short-lived. 10 yards ahead, standing motionless in the moonlight, was a man. Alone. Watching. He didn't speak, didn't move aggressively, yet his posture radiated purpose. My stomach twisted. Tyler and I bolted, diving into the forest without a second thought. Branches clawed at our arms and legs. Roots threatened to trip us. The adrenaline burned in our veins as if we were being chased by a predator far worse than anything imaginable. Eventually, we slowed to a cautious jog. The immediate threat seemed gone, but our nerves refused to calm. Every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps behind us. Every shadow seemed to twitch with intent. What do you think that was?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. Tyler shook his head. "I don't know. But it had to be the guy from the woods. He was waiting. Maybe to trap someone. That's why he was at the entrance." The thought chilled me to my bones. And those voices in the tunnel? Could have been other kids, or worse. My imagination refused to let me forget. By the time we returned to familiar streets, the tension began to ease, though a prickle of paranoia lingered. Even under the bright lights of town, the shadows seemed sharper, the night alive with secrets we weren't meant to uncover. We never went back. The tunnel remains a mystery, as does the man who appeared that night. Years later, on Halloween, I still pass that forest. The wind whispers through the trees, carrying faint echoes of long-forgotten voices. Sometimes, in the distance, I swear I see a figure standing silently, just beyond the tree line. Part of me wants to know what lies beyond the tunnel's darkness, but another part knows some things are best left alone. Curiosity and adventure can be thrilling, but they come with a cost, and some places are meant to remain unexplored. October has always been my favorite month. There's something almost magical about it. The air finally cools down from the heavy summer heat, carrying a crispness that smells faintly of wood smoke and damp leaves. The trees flare up in fiery shades of orange, gold, and red, before letting their leaves drift down one by one until streets and yards are buried under autumn's blanket. Even the sunlight feels different, softer, angled, like it's stretching to reach the earth before winter steals it away. Back when I was around 10 or 11, my friends Liam, Billy, and I had a tradition that we looked forward to all fall. Every weekend, we would rake the leaves in our yards into monstrous piles taller than any of us, wide enough to leap into, as if we were professional wrestlers in some imaginary WWE championship. We called them triple threat matches, and each one ended with someone sprawled, laughing, coughing, and covered in crumpled leaves. My house was perfect for this. We lived on a corner lot with a wide, open side yard stretching toward a tiny dead-end street. Only 2 houses occupied it. One belonged to an old stoner couple who never seemed to care about anything, and the other was a crooked, half-abandoned-looking place that gave off the kind of energy that made you want to glance over your shoulder. The owner never appeared outside. For us, it was ideal. We could scream, wrestle, and toss ourselves into piles of leaves without worrying about someone yelling at us. That particular afternoon had been cloudy and windy, the kind of day where the air smells damp and the sky presses down like a heavy blanket. I remember the chill biting at my ears as we raked the leaves into a pile that seemed to grow taller with every scoop. The smell of decaying leaves mixed with the faint aroma of wood smoke from someone's fireplace down the street. By the time we finished, the pile was enormous, a riot of orange, brown, and gold crumpled against the side yard. We wrestled in it for hours, hooting and flailing, until we were red-faced, sweaty, and sticky with leaves. Every so often, one of us would pop out from under the pile with a triumphant roar, only to be immediately tackled back in. Eventually, our stomachs protested. We went inside to grab snacks and play video games for a while, laughing, arguing, and boasting about imaginary wrestling moves. But Liam and Billy weren't done. "We need a night match," Liam said, eyes shining with mischief. "It'll be scarier." More intense, I hesitated. Darkness always made me uneasy, even then, but the thrill of the forbidden drew me outside. By the time we returned, the sun had set, and the only light came from the single street lamp at the end of the dead end. Its yellow glow pooled across the edge of our yard, making shadows stretch long and thin across the ground. The leaf pile looked smaller, scattered, uneven, as if someone had disturbed it. "Did anyone else see that?" I asked, my voice a little higher than usual. We groaned and started raking again, muttering half-joking complaints about leaves moving on their own. Then Liam froze. His rake kept catching on something underneath. "There's something under here," he muttered, his voice catching. Billy and I jogged over, curiosity and dread knotting my stomach. Together we started clearing the pile, pushing leaves aside with hands and rakes. That's when we froze. Underneath the leaves lay a man. For a second, none of us breathed. My chest felt as though it had turned to stone. Liam's mouth hung open. Billy whispered, "What the hell?" "Kick the leaves off his face," I said, my voice trembling. Billy edged forward, scraping leaves away with the toe of his sneaker. But there was no face, no skin, just a hollow, stiff shell that could have been a mannequin or some twisted dummy. We groaned in relief, laughter mingling with nervous disbelief. "Who would do this?" Liam asked, his voice weak. Then we saw movement. A figure crouched low in the thick bushes at the edge of the yard. We shouted, but the man didn't flinch. He stood, laughing, the sound dry and raspy. He was old, at least 60, with thinning gray hair, huge bulging eyes, and crooked teeth that glinted in the dim light. His breath hissed through his nose, wet and uneven. "Got you good, didn't I?" he said. "Been watching you boys wrestle for a long time. Thought it'd be funny the words should have been a joke." But the way he said "always watching" froze my blood. Liam tried to laugh nervously. "Yeah, you got us." I tugged at Liam's sleeve. "Come on, let's go inside." We left him with the dummy. My dad went outside to check, but by the time he arrived, the man had vanished, taking the dummy with him. That night, I lay in bed with my window cracked open to let in the October air, trying to forget what I had seen. My mind kept drifting to the neighbor, his eyes, the way he had watched us, the way he had known exactly where we were. Hours passed, and just as my eyelids began to droop, I heard a voice, soft and wet, almost whispering, "I didn't mean to creep you out earlier." My muscles locked. Slowly, I turned my head toward the window. There he was, the same bulging eyes, crooked teeth, grinning from the darkness. His arms snaked under the window frame, pushing it higher. The squeal of the window sliding up made my stomach twist. He tried to pull himself in, but his shoulders wedged against the frame. Fingers stretched, groping for me. "Dad!" I screamed. I bolted downstairs. By the time we returned, he was gone. The police arrived the next morning. When they knocked, the man opened the door. Up close, he was worse. Pupils pinpoints, jaw twitching. Inside, his house was a den of filth. Garbage stacked against the walls, dishes molding in the sink, clothes scattered everywhere. It looked less like a home and more like a hideout. Even now, years later, every October breeze rustling the leaves outside my window makes me wonder, was he the only one? Or are there others, hidden, watching, waiting? Two Halloweens ago, I did something incredibly stupid. Looking back now, I know I shouldn't have gone through with it. But at the time, it felt like harmless fun, an adrenaline rush on a cold October night. I had just started working at a small pizza shop in my hometown. After a few days, I got to know some of the people who worked nearby. One of them, Evelyn, cleaned the bar next door in the early mornings. She was mysterious, always dressed in dark, gothic clothes that whispered of secrets. Her voice had a slow, almost hypnotic rhythm, like she was telling you something forbidden. She didn't talk much, but when she did, her words carried weight. Eventually, Evelyn became comfortable with me and my friends visiting her house. That's when I first realized how strange and unsettling her home was. Walking inside felt like stepping into a Halloween shop that had been frozen in time, but not the fun kind. Shelves overflowed with dried flowers, jars of stones and herbs, and books on witches, spells, and old rituals. The centerpiece was a human skull perched above the fireplace, bleached white and cracked, a relic she said had been gifted to her years ago. Despite the eerie vibe, her house felt inviting, like a secret world hidden from the rest of the town. Fast forward to Halloween 2020. The full moon hung heavy in a crystal-clear sky. Evelyn was in her element. Halloween was her sacred day, the night she came alive. She, her daughter, and I planned to pull a prank on one of the cooks at the pizza shop, a guy who'd been acting obnoxious and rude for weeks. Evelyn's daughter suggested we make a spirit box, an old, mysterious-looking wooden box rumored to trap restless spirits inside. The plan was simple. Take the box to the oldest cemetery in town at midnight, let the spirit do its work, and watch the cook lose his mind. Evelyn added her own touches, sprinkling protective salt around the box, chanting incantations I didn't fully understand. I was skeptical but went along, drawn by the thrill. By 11:30 p.m., we piled into the car, the spirit box resting on my lap. It looked disturbingly real. Dark wood aged by time, strange etchings that seemed to shimmer faintly in the moonlight, and an aura that made my skin prickle. I brought my EVP recorder and EMF detector for extra effect, hoping to capture something eerie on tape. As Evelyn's daughter shook the box in the back seat, giggling nervously, the EMF detector suddenly beeped to life, lights flashing wildly. My heart slammed against my ribs. The device had been off. I checked again. It was definitely off. By the time we reached the cemetery, the moonlight washed over every gravestone, casting long, twisted shadows that danced like ghosts. Fallen leaves rustled softly beneath our feet, but the air was unnervingly still, as if the world held its breath. The smell of damp earth mixed with the faint scent of decayed flowers hung heavy, almost suffocating. We moved toward a secluded corner, where old graves leaned crookedly, their inscriptions worn away by time. Evelyn made us sit in a circle on the cold ground. She poured her special salt mix around us, tracing intricate patterns while whispering a protective chant. "No one leaves until the ritual is complete," she warned. The cook, usually brash, was pale and jittery. His eyes darted nervously to the shadows beyond the trees. My stomach tightened with apprehension. The spirit box sat in the center. I placed my recorder and EMF detector beside it. Evelyn's daughter opened the spirit box app on her phone, and the first sounds made every breath stop. Static hissed, punctuated by faint, broken words that twisted through the air like a broken radio. Then it said, clear as day, "Let me out." The EMF detector exploded into a frenzy, lights flashing, static roaring like a trapped scream. A cold wind swept through the cemetery, even though no leaves moved. And then came the footsteps. Slow, deliberate crunching on dry leaves, just beyond the circle of salt. We all froze, eyes wide and locked on the darkness. No one was there, but the sound was unmistakable. Heavy, measured steps closing in. I grabbed Evelyn's hand, my fingers trembling. "I'm officially scared," I whispered. "We should stop this." The cook bolted up, knocking over the salt circle. "We need to get out. Now." The daughter lunged forward and smashed the spirit box with a loud crack. "Forget it! Let's go!" We ran blindly through the trees, lungs burning in the cold night air, hearts hammering in our chests. Back at Evelyn's house, drenched and shaking, we realized what we'd unleashed wasn't just a prank. The box, the ritual, the energy. It was real. And it was angry. Since that night, none of us have felt right. I work alone sometimes, and every shadow feels alive. Whispers slip into the silence when I'm certain I'm alone. Doors creak open by themselves. Lights flicker without reason. The worst part? Evelyn's daughter disappeared 2 months later, just vanished. The police found nothing. No notes, no signs of struggle. Sometimes late at night I swear I hear the spirit box whisper my name. And I know one thing for sure. Curiosity is dangerous. Some games aren't meant to be played. Halloween isn't fun anymore. It's a warning. It was Halloween night, and I was stuck on a flight that had suffered a massive delay for reasons I never really found out. Most passengers had been rebooked or opted to find a hotel, leaving just a handful of us stranded in the airport terminal, waiting to finally board. By us, I mean the unlucky few who either couldn't afford a hotel or had flights with no available alternatives. The terminal was dimly lit, the harsh fluorescent lights buzzing intermittently above. Shadows pooled in corners, stretching along the rows of empty chairs. The smell of stale coffee lingered faintly, mixing with the faint metallic scent of luggage carts. A draft from an open service door made the air feel cooler than it should have been for late October, raising goosebumps along my arms. Despite the frustration of the delay, I actually preferred traveling with fewer people. There's a strange luxury in having the cabin to yourself, or nearly to yourself. Once we finally boarded, I had the freedom to pick my seat, something you usually only get in first class. While most of the remaining passengers clustered in the back rows, a tight-knit group who seemed to know each other, I chose a quiet corner in the front section. The sparse cabin immediately felt more private, though I knew it wouldn't last. The faint smell of airplane fabric polish and recycled air filled my nostrils. Each hum of the engines in the background felt magnified in the stillness, reverberating through the floor and seats. The flight had originally been a daytime departure, but the delay pushed it into an overnight schedule. Normally, I loved seeing the world from above, watching cities shrink and rivers snake through valleys as the sun set. That night, though, I wasn't really looking outside. The dim cabin lights and the low hum of the engines made me focus inward. There's something about being enclosed in an aircraft at night that always gives me a faint sense of unease. Space feels tighter, every sound magnified, every shadow heavier. The occasional creak of the fuselage, subtle vibrations in the aisle, and distant clatter from the galley kept my senses on edge. I had the urge to distract myself, read, scroll through my phone, anything. I hadn't even pulled out my phone when a flight attendant approached me. She was perfectly calm, almost unnervingly so, her movements smooth and deliberate. She asked if I wouldn't mind moving to sit with the other passengers. I was taken aback, but since I was traveling light and the cabin was nearly empty, I agreed. I assumed there was a practical reason, a balance issue perhaps, or a protocol I didn't know. Still, I regretted not asking why. There was something subtle in her glance as she directed me, a flicker in her eyes that hinted she knew more than she let on, though I couldn't tell what. Once I moved and settled in with the small cluster of passengers, the cabin fell into a strange silence. Conversations dwindled to whispers, nervous, uncertain murmurs. The air seemed heavier, almost viscous, pressing down on my shoulders. I felt a chill, and my stomach twisted as though I'd swallowed something sour. It was the kind of dread that presses down on your chest, the oppressive sensation that something is profoundly, impossibly wrong. Every minor sound, the click of a seatbelt, the rustle of a newspaper, felt amplified, echoing off the cabin walls. And then I saw it. At first, I couldn't quite believe my eyes. There, seated in the corner behind me, was a body, a corpse, completely still, dressed in standard passenger attire, unnervingly ordinary, except for the fact that it wasn't breathing. The flight crew treated it as procedure, calm and professional, but my stomach dropped. I'd never shared a small cabin with a dead person before, and the realization was jarring. I forced myself to breathe slowly, telling myself it was okay, that this was standard protocol, that it was Halloween, that it was absurd, but my mind refused to accept it fully. The corpse's skin seemed oddly pale under the dim cabin lighting, almost absorbing the surrounding shadows, and for a fleeting moment I swore its head turned slightly as I blinked. I decided I needed to step away. The restroom at the back of the cabin seemed like the best place to collect myself. I walked the aisle slowly, trying not to make my panic obvious, my heart hammering with each step. Every thud of my foot on the aisle carpet sounded like a gunshot in the tense silence. Once inside the restroom, I locked the door and exhaled sharply, leaning against the wall. For a few minutes I just tried to calm myself, telling myself I wasn't alone, reminding myself that the other passengers and crew were there, that nothing could happen in such a monitored environment. The fluorescent light flickered above me briefly, and I caught a reflection in the mirror that seemed wrong, as though my eyes looked slightly hollowed out. Then came the thud. It was sudden and loud, a sharp banging against the restroom door. My breath caught in my throat. I froze, listening. For a moment there was nothing but my own ragged breathing. The door rattled again, louder this time. My skin crawled, and my grip on the sink tightened. Strangely, I felt more exposed and vulnerable inside the restroom than I had anywhere else in the cabin. The metallic clang of the handle echoed in the small space, and a faint, almost imperceptible scratching sound ran along the edges of the door frame. After a few tense moments, I cautiously cracked the door. Nothing. No one was there. My relief was immediate but short-lived. Just as I was about to slip back to my seat, the same flight attendant from before appeared seemingly out of nowhere, pushing the service trolley down the aisle. She nearly collided with me. What unsettled me was the way she looked at me. The kind of stare that makes your stomach flip. The one where someone suspects you're onto something you shouldn't be. There was no word spoken, just that momentary pause, that odd, knowing glance. Then she moved on, continuing her service with the other passengers as though nothing had happened. I hurried back to my seat, my senses hyper-aware. The faint scent of her perfume lingered in the air, a mix of floral sweetness and something sharper I couldn't place, almost metallic, making my head spin. I nearly forgot about the corpse. Almost. Sitting down, I realized I had actually walked past it without even noticing it until that moment. The dead body remained quiet, motionless, and oddly unremarkable, yet its presence filled the cabin with an almost tangible dread. The murmurs of the other passengers had ceased entirely. None of them had reacted to the loud banging on the restroom door or the unsettling gaze of the attendant. It was as if the entire flight existed in a separate reality, one I had stumbled into. Maybe it was a prank, I told myself. Halloween pranks weren't unusual. Maybe the banging wasn't as loud as I remembered. Maybe I had imagined the corpse entirely in my state of heightened fear. But I couldn't shake the memory of the door handle moving ever so slightly, the thud that had reverberated through the restroom, or the feeling of eyes on me when I peeked down the aisle. Something had been there. Something had moved. The rest of the flight passed without incident, but I stayed vigilant. I didn't speak to the other passengers, and I didn't return to the restroom. I kept my head down, focusing on anything else. Music, phone, the faint hum of the engines, but the tension never fully left. Even after landing and exiting the plane, the memory lingered. The corpse in the corner, the pounding on the door, the strange stare from the flight attendant. I've never shared the full story with anyone, not until now. People ask about the flights, about Halloween, about strange experiences in the air. I smile and offer a generic, "Nothing ever happened." Knowing the truth is far more unsettling. The memory of that night is a silent companion, a reminder that even in the controlled, monitored environment of an airplane, the inexplicable can find you, and often when you least expect it. Halloween flights may seem mundane, routine, even boring for most people. But that one night on that delayed flight changed my perspective entirely. The world felt darker, heavier, and infinitely more unpredictable after it. Every time I fly now, I glance at the empty seats, the aisle, the flight attendants moving silently through the cabin, and I remember, sometimes you aren't alone, even when you think you are. And sometimes the shadows carry passengers that should not be there. Halloween 2019 was supposed to be just another night of fun and fright, a final thrill before college started consuming every waking hour. My friends and I, dumb and reckless as always, were desperate for something that would actually scare us. The usual haunted house YouTube videos and horror podcasts weren't cutting it anymore. We wanted real terror, something raw and alive, something that would haunt us long after the night ended. Growing up in Illinois, I'd heard all the stories about Bachelor's Grove Cemetery, a place shrouded in decades of whispered legends. Ghostly apparitions, strange lights flickering between the trees, unnatural noises that no one could explain. Some locals swore the cemetery itself was alive, feeding off fear and sorrow. Most of it sounded like urban legend, but there was always a sliver of unease beneath the surface of those tales, a feeling I'd never quite shaken. That night, our plan was simple. Sneak in after dark, explore the grounds, and maybe, just maybe, witness something real. The drive out was quiet, but tense. Logan, Paul, Eddie, and I piled into my car, the fading sun casting long shadows over the cracked pavement. The roads narrowed, hemmed in by dark forests that seemed to lean closer as we approached. The air smelled of wet earth and fallen leaves, a scent that promised something ancient and forgotten. Everyone joked nervously, but I could see it in their eyes. The same mix of excitement and unease I felt tightening my chest. We avoided the main cemetery parking lot, knowing the local police monitored it heavily, especially around Halloween. Instead, we parked at a nearly empty diner's back lot, a shadowed, sprawling patch of cracked asphalt surrounded by overgrown woods. From there, we'd hike the rest of the way on foot. The sun had disappeared completely by the time we slipped from the diner's safety into the forest. Darkness here wasn't just the absence of light. It was a living, breathing thing that swallowed everything whole. My flashlight barely cut through the blackness. Every tree trunk was a looming sentinel, every whisper of wind a ghostly sigh. My teeth chattered despite the mild chill, and a fine sweat clung to my skin. Logan's usual jokes died off quickly, and even Paul and Eddie's bravado felt forced. The path was narrow and uneven, lined with brittle branches and damp leaves that crunched underfoot. The silence was crushing, broken only by the distant hoot of an owl or the sharp snap of a twig. Even our whispered voices sounded loud and intrusive. I kept glancing back, half expecting to see glowing eyes watching us, but the shadows remained empty. Still, the feeling of being watched refused to leave. When we finally reached the cemetery's edge, the sight took my breath away. Tombstones jutted from the earth at odd angles, many cracked or leaning with age. Moss covered the inscriptions, and roots snaked over some graves like slow-moving vines. The ground seemed to breathe beneath the decay, as if the soil remembered every soul buried there. The moon peeked through the canopy, casting a ghostly silver light over the scene. We decided to split up, each taking a different direction to cover more ground. I argued against it, but the group insisted. Curiosity pushing them forward, bravado muffling their caution. I stayed close to the denser section, where the oldest graves lay half swallowed by earth and roots. That's when I heard it. At first I thought it was the wind slipping through the branches, or maybe distant voices from a group of late-night visitors. But no, this was different. A low, rhythmic chanting, carried on the air with a hollow, eerie resonance. The words were foreign, not English, but the tone was unmistakable, desperate, angry, and deeply wrong. The sound made every muscle in me freeze. My heart slammed against my ribs like a caged animal. I flicked my flashlight toward where I thought the sound was coming from, and it caught the edge of a small clearing. There, bent over the ground, was a lone figure, cloaked in black. The man's presence seemed unnatural, like he didn't belong in the world of the living. On the earth beneath him was a perfect pentagram, carved deeply into the dirt, and filled with a strange, dark red substance that glistened faintly in the moonlight. The chanting grew louder, deeper, filling the night air like a poisonous fog. I could feel the ground vibrate with the man's words, as if the earth itself were responding to his invocation. A flicker of terror clawed at my mind. This wasn't just some prank or ritual for show. This was something old and angry, something dangerous. Suddenly, Eddie's flashlight slipped across the scene, and the man snapped upright. His face was terrifying, pale and gaunt, eyes hollow and burning with malignant rage. His mouth twisted into a scream that shattered the silence like a physical blow. It wasn't a human scream. It was primal, bone-chilling, filled with a fury that seemed to rip at the fabric of the night itself. We ran. There are no words that capture the raw, unfiltered terror that seized me then. It wasn't just fear. It was pure survival instinct. My legs pumped like pistons, lungs burning as I stumbled through the tangled forest. The scream echoed behind us, fading but never quite leaving. Every root, every branch felt like a trap waiting to snare us. We didn't stop until the forest finally spat us back onto the empty road. Gasping, hearts pounding, we piled into the car in silence. Doors locked, windows up, engine roaring as we sped away. For 20 minutes, none of us dared speak. The weight of what we'd seen pressed on us like a living thing. I never found out what the man was trying to summon, or what might have happened if he'd succeeded. But I know one thing for certain. Bachelor's Grove is not just haunted by ghosts. It's alive, watching, and waiting for the next foolish souls to stumble into its dark embrace. Years later, I still feel the chill of that night. Every Halloween, when the wind stirs the dead leaves and shadows flicker in the corner of my vision, I remember the pentagram, the chanting, and the scream. And I remember how close we came to losing everything. Some things aren't meant to be disturbed, and some horrors don't stay buried. When I was 18, I threw a Halloween party at my parents' house. It was supposed to be simple. A closed invite with about 40 or 50 people I knew from school, maybe a few plus ones. Nothing crazy. My parents agreed on one condition, that I kept strangers out and left the house cleaner than it was before. I nodded along, swearing it would be a calm, non-alcoholic gathering. They gave me money for snacks and soda. Of course, the first case of beer showed up before the sun went down. By 6, the place was alive. The backyard was strung with orange lights, cheap fake cobwebs clung to the porch, and the bass from my friend's DJ setup thumped through the walls. Music, laughter, and the smell of pizza boxes filled the air. People moved in and out of the house, the kitchen counter lined with soda, candy bowls, and liquor that someone had smuggled in. The night felt alive, chaotic, but in a good way. I wandered from room to room, making sure no one trashed the place. Every face looked familiar. Every costume something I could connect to a classmate, a neighbor, or a friend of a friend. That was the point. No strangers. Around 8 o'clock, one of my buddies came out from the kitchen with a weird look. "Hey, who's the guy in the skeleton bodysuit?" I frowned. "What guy?" "The tall dude, all black and white spandex. Full mask. He was just in there, looking around like he lost something." My stomach tightened. I hadn't seen anyone like that. Curious, I went inside. The kitchen was crowded with people grabbing drinks and laughing, but no skeleton. "Did you guys see someone in a bodysuit?" I asked. One girl nodded, chewing on a Twizzler. "Yeah, creepy dude. He came through here, didn't say anything. Seemed like he was snooping. Who invited him?" Nobody answered, just shrugs. That was when I felt the first flicker of unease. I scanned the house, finally spotting him at the top of the staircase. He was descending slowly, one gloved hand on the rail. The costume was simple but unsettling. Tight black fabric stretched over his frame, white bones painted across it, the grinning skull mask staring blankly. He was taller than me, stockier, and the silence in his movements felt wrong. "Hey," I called. "Who are you?" The man paused at the bottom step. His voice was deep, far too deep to be one of my classmates. "Mike. I was using the bathroom." The way he said it was flat, almost mechanical. He stepped past me like I wasn't even there. "Wait, who invited you?" I pressed. "Tom," he said without hesitation. I searched my memory. I didn't know a Tom. "Who's Tom?" Nothing. Just silence behind that grinning mask. "Take the mask off," I demanded, my voice cracking slightly. He didn't even acknowledge me. He simply walked to the front door, opened it, and slipped outside. I bolted up the stairs, checking every room. The bathroom door was cracked, but everything looked untouched. No drawers pulled open, no bags rifled through. Still, my skin crawled. When I came back down, I locked the front door and told a few friends. Nobody had any idea who Mike or Tom was. The night carried on. Music, laughter, spilled drinks. But every so often I'd catch myself staring at the door, expecting him to walk back in. By midnight, most people had left. A handful of close friends stayed behind to help clean. One of them, Vinny, decided to crash on the couch. My little sister, only 14, had been upstairs the whole night. She wasn't allowed at the party, and she'd gone to bed hours ago. By 1:30, the music was off, the house dim and quiet. I changed into pajamas, brushed my teeth, and joined Vinny in the living room. We flipped through dumb YouTube clips, trying to laugh off the weird encounter. For a while, it worked. Then came the sound. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, directly above us. I frowned. Guess we woke her up. But when I went upstairs and cracked my sister's door, she was asleep, her breathing steady. The footsteps hadn't come from her. That's when I noticed my parents' bedroom door. I knew I'd closed it before the party. Now it was ajar, just enough for a shadow to slip through. I pushed it open, peering into the darkness. The room looked empty, quiet. As I pulled the door back, my eyes caught a sliver of movement through the narrowing gap. The skeleton suit, standing perfectly still, watching me. I went cold all over. Somehow I didn't scream. I just shut the door and walked away, my body numb, my brain screaming. Back downstairs, I grabbed Vinny's arm. He's here. The skeleton guy. He's upstairs. Vinny's eyes went wide. He fumbled for his phone, dialing 911 with shaking hands. I didn't wait. I crept back upstairs, straight into my sister's room. I shook her awake, whispering that she had to come with me and to stay absolutely quiet. Her eyes were huge with fear, but she nodded. Together we crept down the stairs, every creak in the wood making my stomach twist. In the kitchen, Vinny was waiting by the back door, pale and tense. We slipped outside into the backyard, cutting through to the neighbor's house. I rang their bell over and over until they answered. The relief of stepping inside their warm, brightly lit living room nearly buckled my knees. We waited. Minutes stretched into forever. Every headlight on the street made me jump. Finally, the police arrived. They searched the house top to bottom. The man was gone. But my parents' bedroom window was wide open, the curtains fluttering in the night breeze. The closet door was ajar, and my dad's safe had been shifted, scrape marks gouging the hardwood where someone had tried to drag it. It wasn't random. He knew where the safe was. He'd used the party as cover. The cops asked questions, but all I could say was that I didn't know him, didn't know a Tom, had never seen him before. Nobody did. When my parents came home, I told them everything. Or rather, my sister told them, because I couldn't get the words out without shaking. That was the last party I was ever allowed to host. But worse than the grounding was the memory. The way he'd stood there, silent and waiting. The way he knew exactly where to look. The way his voice was too deep, too old, too calm. He hadn't come for the party. He'd come for us. And for all I know, he might still be out there, waiting for another chance to slip inside someone's house under the cover of laughter and music. Some stories are passed down through generations, whispered late at night and told with a mixture of awe and terror. One of my favorites came from my grandmother, who recalled it from her own childhood during the Great Depression. She would often preface it with a warning. This one belongs in the archives of the Twilight Zone. It's a story that stayed with her for decades, and one that still haunts me when I think about it. The night the Martians came to Tennessee. It was October 1938, in the hollers of rural Tennessee. My grandmother, 8 years old at the time, was the eldest of 7 children. Life was hard. Money was scarce, and luxuries were almost non-existent. But the one thing the family cherished above all else was their large oak radio, perched in the room nearest the kitchen. That radio was the heartbeat of the household. After supper, the children were allowed 1 hour of listening while my great-grandfather sat in his chair and my great-grandmother cleaned up the dishes. Programs like Little Orphan Annie, Edgar Bergen and Charlie McCarthy, and The Lone Ranger filled the room with wonder and excitement. That night, though, the familiar voices on the radio were abruptly interrupted by a special bulletin. My grandmother remembered the quiet that fell over the room, a stillness so deep it made her skin prickle. The voice that followed was not the cheerful announcer they expected. It was serious, unnervingly calm, and yet filled with a sense of impending doom. The broadcast claimed that Martians had landed in nearby cities, attacking citizens and destroying buildings. My grandmother's younger siblings, confused and frightened, began whimpering. Her older brother, Paul, the family protector, immediately hushed them. But she could see the fear in his face, and it made her own hands tremble. She sensed something was terribly wrong. In the midst of the growing panic, her mother, my great-grandmother, dropped a plate on the wooden floor. The crash of ceramic against wood shattered the tension briefly, but the sound of their dog barking on the porch only heightened the chaos. Then Paul bolted from his chair, yanked the shotgun off the wall, and burst through the screen door. The younger children clung to my grandmother, terrified, while she tried to comfort them as a blast from the shotgun rang through the night. The dog barked furiously, as if aware of some unseen threat. Later, my grandmother would say she never fully understood why Paul had fired the gun. Perhaps he thought it would scare off whatever he imagined might be lurking in the woods. Maybe it was just instinct, a father's urgent response to protect his family. Whatever the reason, Paul didn't linger outside. He returned to the truck with a worried expression, though he claimed he hadn't seen anything unusual. The family had no time to waste. According to Paul, the Martians, whether real or imagined, would soon move from the city toward the countryside. There were already rumors of war. He insisted that they leave immediately, gathering coats, shoes, and blankets for the children. My grandmother, trembling with fear, did as she was told, guiding the youngest siblings into the back of the truck. Her parents argued hurriedly about what to take, their voices tight with anxiety. "Leave it! Leave it all!" "We don't have time. Get in the damn truck." My great-grandfather, a man who rarely drank or swore, cursed more than ever that chilly October night. But fear can make even the most disciplined man abandon decorum. He slammed the truck door, muffled sobs escaping my great-grandmother, and they sped down the dirt roads, deeper into the backcountry. Darkness swallowed them. There were no lights in the sky, no otherworldly sounds, just the crackling of branches and the distant calls of wildlife. Suddenly, the truck came to a stop. The engine clicked off, and they were surrounded by pitch-black woods. The children began to cry. My great-grandmother, trying to soothe them, walked among them while Paul stepped out, gun in hand, scanning the sky. He wiped his brow with his handkerchief and returned to the truck, trying to mask his own fear. He told the children they were on a camping trip, nothing more, and reassured them he would return to check the radio for updates. The children leaned against nearby trees, trying to calm themselves. One of my uncles, trying to reassure my grandmother, told her that as long as the men of the house were with her, nothing would happen. That small comfort was enough to quiet her trembling heart for a while. Eventually, drowsiness overcame the terror, and she closed her eyes against the night, listening to the wind through the trees. Then, headlights appeared, cutting through the darkness. Panic gripped the children once more. "The Martians! They're coming for us," my grandmother thought. But the lights revealed Paul, returning to the truck with a relieved smile. Everything was safe. The family was able to return home, hearts still pounding, minds racing with what-ifs. It wasn't until the next day that the truth came out. Through the radio, they learned that the Martian invasion was a broadcast, an adaptation of H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds. Orson Welles and his production had fooled the nation, and my grandmother's family, like countless others, had been caught in the grip of sheer terror. She laughed about it later, though the memory always carried a shiver. Paul even considered getting rid of the radio altogether, embarrassed by how thoroughly they had been deceived. My grandmother, for her part, became wary of anything involving extraterrestrials. Alien movies and shows were never welcome in the household, and one of my uncles even gave her a copy of The War of the Worlds as a joke for her birthday. She didn't find it funny at the time. When she passed, I inherited the book, which still sits on my shelf today. But more than a relic, it's a reminder of a night when fear and imagination merged so completely that even the adults weren't immune. That night shaped my fascination with horror, the tension between reality and perception, and the way stories, true or not, can ripple through generations. Grandma always said that the story was a lesson in vigilance and courage, even if the threat was imagined. It's a tale that, at its core, celebrates the instincts of a protective family, the bravery of a young girl clinging to hope, and the enduring power of storytelling. And while the Martians never came, the memory of that night remains as real and as frightening as anything she ever faced. Halloween has always been one of those nights that leaves a lasting impression, even years later. For me, it wasn't about costumes or candy, though I loved both. It was about tradition. When I was between 10 and 14, my family followed the same Halloween routine every year. My parents, my godparents, and their son would meet up, and we'd trick-or-treat together through their neighborhood. My older siblings had done the same route, and some of the traditions dated back even further, weaving the past into every step we took down those leaf-strewn sidewalks. The highlight of the night was always the local funeral home, just a few blocks from my house. Most kids might think a funeral home is a little eerie for a Halloween party, but this one was special. It had everything. Cotton candy machines spinning clouds of pink sugar, trays of fresh donuts dusted with cinnamon, steaming mugs of cider that warmed your fingers, and bowls of popcorn that smelled like buttery goodness. And then there were the balloons, bright, shiny, floating trophies that all the kids wanted. But the balloons came with a catch. To get one, you had to shake the hand of a man in a full gorilla costume. I mean full, movie set quality. The hands were enormous, padded and veined to look grotesquely real, and the suit shimmered under the dim streetlights, as if it were alive. The head had glassy eyes that caught the light just right, And the handshake, oh, the handshake, was brutal. Like the gorilla's grip was trying to squeeze the bones out of your fingers. Every year, I dreaded that handshake. It wasn't just the pain. It was the way his fingers lingered a moment too long, like he was sizing you up, deciding something you couldn't see. My older siblings warned me, sharing their stories of sore hands and racing hearts. I developed a strategy: avoid the gorilla completely, grab my snacks and move on as fast as possible. For a while, it worked. That Halloween night started just like any other. The streets were cool and crisp, lit by flickering jack-o'-lanterns and the occasional porch light. My friends and family laughed and joked as we moved from house to house, baskets filling with candy and cheeks flushed from the cold. When we reached the funeral home, I hung back, watching others approach the gorilla for their balloons. I stayed near the cider table, letting the others brave the handshake. I was proud of my clever plan. No balloons, no crushing grip, no lingering fear. But Halloween has a way of twisting even the most familiar nights into something strange and unexplainable. Later that night back home, I couldn't sleep. I'd avoided scary movies and ghost stories all day, determined to get a good night's rest. But an uneasy feeling settled deep in my chest, something heavier than childhood imagination. I decided to sleep on the floor with my chocolate lab, hoping her warm presence would ground me. My dad had fallen asleep on the couch, the house silent except for the faint ticking of the clock. Around midnight, the silence broke. My dog stirred and began pacing restlessly, her nails clicking on the hardwood floor. I got up to let her outside. She ran out, did her business, and bounded happily back inside, tail wagging. But then I saw it, standing motionless in the street, right outside my house. A figure, still as a statue. I froze. My heart hammered so loud I thought it would burst. Slowly, on my knees, I crept to the window, careful not to make a sound. My eyes adjusted to the darkness, and my stomach turned cold. The figure wasn't moving, but I recognized it immediately. It was the gorilla, the same one from the funeral home, holding balloons, bright, glossy balloons floating just above the pavement. The street was silent. My dad was asleep on the couch. The neighbors' houses were dark, their windows like empty eyes. Panic surged through me, sharp and raw. I wanted to scream, to run, to hide, but my feet refused to move. Instead, I shook my dad awake, whispering urgently, "Dad, someone's outside." The gorilla, with balloons. Right in front of the house, he yawned, rubbed his eyes, and got up. The front door creaked as he opened it, peering into the empty street. "There's no one here," he said calmly. "Probably just a bad dream, or your imagination." But I knew better. The gorilla didn't just show up for a laugh. He was watching, waiting. The next morning, the unease lingered like a shadow across my thoughts. I told myself it was my imagination, a trick of the light, nerves running high after a long day of candy and costumes. But then I found it. A single red balloon tied to the mailbox out front. It hadn't been there the night before. I reached out to touch the string, and a sharp sting blossomed across my palm. Looking down, I saw a faint bruise, purple, shaped like a giant handprint, like a handshake, a warning. Every Halloween since, I glanced down the street, half expecting to see that gorilla waiting silently, clutching balloons that promised something darker than candy. I still take my niece and nephew trick-or-treating, watch them laugh and chase each other through the streets. But in the back of my mind, I wonder, is the man in the gorilla costume still out there, waiting for the next kid to reach for a balloon, to shake a hand that crushes bones, and to step into the shadow of something unexplainable? Because sometimes, the scariest things aren't monsters or ghosts. They're the ordinary people in costumes, waiting silently, holding something that should be harmless, like a balloon. My name's Danny, and I'm from Liverpool. I'm 33 now, but for years, Halloween was the highlight of every autumn. A night charged with laughter, dares, and the thrill of the unknown. When I was 15, my mates and I ran the streets in ridiculous costumes, stuffing our bags with sweets until they nearly tore. Those nights felt magical, electric. But Halloween 2003 wasn't magic. It was something darker, something I'm still untangling 20 years later. By 9 o'clock that night, Sam, Corky, and I were trudging through a quiet riverside neighborhood, the air thick with drizzle. Trick-or-treating as teenagers isn't cute. Most houses were dark, their windows shuttered against the cold, and the few faces that peeked through curtains wore nothing but suspicion. We were cold, damp, and frustrated with our pitiful haul of sweets. The drizzle had turned into a steady rain, and the street lamps cast smeared orange glows on slick pavements, turning the world into a blurry nightmare. Then we saw the house. It stood apart from the others, a tidy, older home with neatly trimmed hedges and a single dim light glowing from a curtained window. The rain pattered softly against the glass, muffling sounds. Something about it felt different. When we knocked, an older man answered. He looked frail at first glance, thin, white hair, a slight stoop, but his eyes sparkled with an unsettling sharpness. He laughed at our costumes, clapped as if we were long-lost visitors, and said no one had come by all evening. "You're just in time," he said, voice low and oddly melodic. "I need a hand with something in the pantry." I remember the strange flicker in his gaze when he said it. Like a shadow passed through his eyes, too quick to catch, but enough to unsettle. Sam and Corky volunteered, eager for sweets or just tired of the cold. I stayed outside with the others, umbrellas shielding us from the rain as we waited on the curb, joking and bragging to cover the unease creeping in. Minutes dragged. The wind picked up, swirling wet leaves across the pavement. We tried calling Sam and Corky's phones. No answer. Then a loud crash shattered the quiet. Sam scrambled over the wooden fence like a man possessed, his face pale and wild. "Run!" he shouted. "Corky's still inside!" I froze, eyes snapping to the second-floor window. Corky was clinging backward over the ledge like some desperate stuntman. Below him, a flower bed cushioned his fall, but it looked like a 15-foot drop. Then came the scream, sharp, piercing, soaked with pure terror. My stomach dropped. Corky hit the ground hard, blood trickling from a nasty cut on his scalp. His hands trembled as he pushed himself up. Sam crouched nearby, shaking, eyes wide with panic. "He had a knife," Corky gasped. "And a taser. Hands on your knees." His voice was breathless, barely registering the pain. That man, the one we'd thought frail and harmless, was something else. Corky later told me the man's movements were impossibly fast, like a predator playing with his prey. At one point he appeared half naked, wearing only socks and shoes, a grotesque, surreal image in the dim hallway light. I can still see it, the twitch of those pale legs, the flash of bare skin against peeling wallpaper. It was like he wasn't entirely human, something warped and unnatural lurking beneath that fragile exterior. Sam told me the man had cornered them in the pantry, a cramped, shadowed space lined with dusty jars and forgotten cans. One second, the cupboard was empty. The next, the man revealed the knife and taser with a slow, deliberate smile. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and rust, and the panic had the taste of metal in our mouths. They barely escaped. Sam bolted out the back door, crashing through a low fence and landing hard in the wet grass. Corky climbed out the front-facing window, his fall broken by the flower bed but leaving scrapes and bruises on his hands and legs. I remember thinking we should call the police, but what could we say? 5 teenagers sneaking into a stranger's house, smelling of alcohol, claiming a man attacked us. Who'd believe it? That night, soaked and shaking, we huddled together on the sidewalk. Corky's head wound bled steadily, a red ribbon against his pale skin. Sam's hands trembled like leaves in the wind. No one spoke. The only sound was rain, falling hard enough to drown out everything but the pounding in our chests. In the days that followed, the memory haunted me. Every shadow seemed to twitch with that man's eerie grace. Every quiet street corner squeezed my chest with cold dread. I couldn't stop replaying the images. The sick smile, the half-naked figure, the flickering eyes. Years later, when we dared to revisit the neighborhood, a young couple lived in the house. The old man was gone, and the creeping dread that had clung to that place seemed to have lifted, almost like the house exhaled a sigh of relief. But maybe forgetting is safer than knowing. Sometimes the scariest monsters aren't ghosts or legends. They're human, clever, unpredictable, and terrifyingly real. And on that rain-soaked Halloween night, I learned that lesson the hard way. A few Halloweens ago, something happened to me that had nothing to do with ghosts, monsters, or supernatural beings, but it terrified me in a way that still lingers. I wasn't enrolled in school at the time, but most of my friends were attending our local community college. 4 of them, 2 guys and 2 girls, shared a small, slightly run-down house about 2 miles from campus. The kind of place that smelled faintly of old carpet, burnt coffee, and whatever takeout had been left in the fridge for too long. Early October, I received a text from one of them. They were throwing a big pre-Halloween party the weekend before the 31st, and I was invited. Excited, I said yes immediately and made sure to tell my boss I'd be taking the weekend off. Normally, I might have faced pushback, but I had enough vacation hours to cover it without issue. As the party approached, I realized I'd be going alone. That thought made my stomach knot. I asked a friend from work to come with me, but she declined. She didn't feel comfortable attending without her boyfriend. Reluctantly, I prepared myself for a night surrounded mostly by strangers, telling myself my friends would be enough to keep me safe. Still, I felt a quiet, creeping anxiety I couldn't shake. When I arrived, the house was already buzzing with activity. I had gotten there early, hoping to help with setup, and ended up placing fake cobwebs in corners, adjusting string lights, and organizing snacks. By the time the first guests arrived, the living room smelled of cheap beer, pumpkin-scented candles, and faint traces of incense someone had decided to light for effect. The music was loud, a thumping electronic beat that vibrated through the floorboards, and the sound of laughter mixed with the occasional shout created a chaotic energy that made me uneasy. By 10 o'clock, the house was packed. People were milling around in costumes, some elaborate, some last-minute attempts. The first keg was tapped shortly after 11, and one of the guys at the party, someone I vaguely knew from a few classes, offered to fill my cup. I smiled and thanked him. But something about the way he lingered, his smile too polished, made a small alarm bell ring in my chest. I tried to ignore it and turned to catch up with an old friend I hadn't seen in years. We laughed and reminisced, but my senses were on edge. The pounding music seemed louder with each passing moment, the flashing lights disorienting. My heart raced, palms sweaty, stomach twisting with unease. I kept glancing over my shoulder, noting faces that seemed overly attentive, movements that were slightly off. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe not. The party itself became a blur of noise, shadows, and sudden touches. Someone bumped into me, apologizing with an awkward smile. Another offered me a drink. I accepted it, thinking nothing of it. But I couldn't shake the uneasy sensation that I was being observed too closely. Every step through the crowded rooms felt like moving through a maze designed to confuse and overwhelm. Eventually, my body began demanding rest. The alcohol, combined with the overwhelming noise and flashing lights, made my head spin. I wandered through the hallways until I found an empty bedroom at the far end of the house. The carpet was slightly damp, and the curtains hung halfway over the window, casting jagged shadows across the walls. I collapsed onto the bed, trying to make myself comfortable. My eyes closed, but the room didn't feel safe. The laughter, the music, they pressed against the thin walls, invading my awareness. My mind raced with thoughts I couldn't control. What if someone finds me here? Why did I come alone? Was I too trusting? I thought I drifted into a dream. Visions of a friend's boyfriend lifting me onto his back. But that was the last thing I remembered before everything went black. The next thing I knew, I was in a bright, sterile hospital room. The fluorescent light stabbed at my eyes, and every muted voice beyond the curtain made my stomach churn. The air smelled of antiseptic and something faintly metallic, mixed with the sour scent of my own sweat. My hands trembled uncontrollably as I tried to sit upright, the room tilting like I was still spinning from the drugs. A familiar voice, calm and firm, spoke softly beside me. It was my coworker from earlier. She held my hand, brushing damp hair away from my face. I tried to speak, but my throat felt raw, my voice gravelly and weak. Panic surged as I realized how helpless I had been. She explained what had happened. Someone had roofied me. I had not been assaulted, she reassured, but the drugs and alcohol combined could have been fatal. The horror of that night pressed on me as she described how she and her boyfriend had searched the party, finally finding me unconscious in a bedroom with two unknown men standing nearby. Their expressions were sheepish, almost caught, but not hostile. Jeff had confronted them, and they left without resistance. The details sunk in slowly. The man who had helped me at the keg, the one I had casually thanked, had almost certainly been involved. My stomach turned at the thought. The house, the crowd, the music, all seemed innocent at first, but it had become a perfect storm for danger. The night stretched on in the hospital like a nightmare without end. Every sound, the soft click of shoes, the hum of machinery, the rustle of sheets, felt amplified. I couldn't stop replaying the party in my head, analyzing every interaction, every smile, every touch. My friend tried to comfort me, but even her presence couldn't quiet the storm in my mind. Sleep came fitfully. When it did, it brought visions of shadows and distorted laughter, of the pounding music and faceless figures watching me. Even waking moments offered no relief. Sunlight streaming through the blinds felt sharp against my skull, and every small noise made my chest tighten with unease. In the following weeks, my life changed. I became hyper-aware of my surroundings, constantly scanning rooms, monitoring exits, and never leaving a drink unattended. Laughter, gestures, even casual friendliness triggered spikes of panic. I struggled to regain normalcy, but the terror lingered like a shadow at the edge of perception. Months passed, but the memory never faded. I replayed the night endlessly in my mind, imagining different scenarios, questioning everyone I had interacted with. I oscillated between gratitude for my friend and Jeff, and anger at the careless, predatory individual who had almost ruined my life. Every crowded room, every party, every unexpected touch brought a flash of icy dread. That Halloween taught me a harsh lesson. Terror doesn't always wear a mask or lurk in shadows. Sometimes it wears a friendly smile, offers a drink, and waits for the perfect moment to strike. The memory of helplessness, disorientation, and betrayal lingers like an echo behind everyday noise, an ever-present reminder of how fragile safety and trust can be. Even now, years later, I feel it in subtle ways. A stranger's gaze that lingers too long, the unexpected movement in a crowded room, a hand placed too casually on a shoulder. My body tenses, my stomach knots, and I remember. I survived that night, but the terror has never truly left me. It all began a few Halloweens ago, just after my younger sister Emily celebrated her 8th birthday. Our parents had taken her to the town's annual Halloween fair, a sprawling patchwork of flickering jack-o'-lanterns, makeshift stalls, and laughter echoing under the crisp autumn sky. Among the colorful booths filled with candy and games, my mom spotted a small stall tucked away near the edge of the fairgrounds. It was cluttered with old toys and trinkets, the kind that seemed forgotten by time. There, resting on a faded velvet cloth, was a doll unlike any I'd seen before. She was a rag doll, with worn cotton limbs and a face hand-painted with delicate care, bright glassy eyes that caught the light like little lanterns, framed by tangled strands of orange yarn hair, and dressed in a tiny faded pumpkin orange dress stitched with black thread. Something about her was unsettling, but my sister's face lit up immediately. "She's perfect," Emily said, her voice full of wonder. "She can stay in my room forever." My parents exchanged amused smiles and bought the doll, thinking it was harmless fun, a little Halloween souvenir for their daughter. For a few days, the doll sat innocently on the shelf above Emily's bed. She talked to it constantly, giving it names, telling it secrets I wasn't allowed to hear. Emily insisted the doll had to sleep beside her at night, and my parents humored the ritual. But soon, the unsettling began. The first night I noticed something was wrong. It was nearly midnight. I'd woken up thirsty and slipped quietly to the bathroom. Passing Emily's room, I saw the door cracked open just a sliver. Inside, the doll was sitting on the bed, exactly where it had been before, except this time, its glass eyes were fixed in my direction. The head had turned slightly, tilted, as if it were watching me. My breath caught. I blinked hard, forcing myself to believe I was imagining it. When I looked again, the doll was facing the wall. I shook my head and hurried away, trying to convince myself I was just tired. In the days that followed, strange things began to pile up. Small toys in Emily's room would be moved into odd formations, sometimes neatly stacked, sometimes scattered like a cryptic message. The doll itself was no longer where it should be. One morning, I found it perched on the kitchen counter, staring blankly out the window, even though my sister swore she hadn't touched it. Then came the sounds. Late at night, when the house should have been silent, faint giggles echoed from the attic, a high, tinkling laughter that didn't belong to any of us. Whispers floated down the staircase, soft and unintelligible, like a secret language meant only for the doll. My parents blamed the creaks and groans of the old house, but I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. By mid-October, the unease escalated into fear. One night, Emily woke screaming, trembling in her bed. I ran into her room and found her huddled in the corner, pointing a shaky finger at the doll. Its mouth, once a simple painted smile, now looked twisted, almost as if it were mouthing words. "She's moving," Emily gasped, tears streaming down her face. "She's alive!" My mom snatched the doll off the bed, but even as she held it, I felt a chill seep from the doll's ragged body, an unnatural weight that made it almost impossible to hold. The glass eyes seemed to gleam, and for a split second I swear they flickered, like a dying candle struggling to stay lit. We put the doll on the hallway table, hoping to keep it away from Emily, but the house didn't quiet. Doors creaked open on their own. Drawers were left ajar. The doll turned up in rooms we hadn't entered. The attic footsteps grew louder and slower, like a deliberate pacing just above our heads. Then came the night of the twist, the truth hiding beneath the doll's quiet menace. While rummaging in the attic, my dad found an old, dusty box wedged between the rafters. Inside was a brittle journal belonging to the doll's previous owner, a girl named Lila, who had disappeared nearly a century ago on Halloween night. The journal spoke of a curse. The doll was never just a toy, but a vessel for a restless spirit, a child who'd been lost and trapped, longing for a family to love her again. The doll didn't just move. It sought to replace Emily, to become the child it never had. On Halloween night, the house felt suffocating. Emily refused to leave her room. My parents were tense, exchanging worried glances. I stayed in my room, dread curling in my stomach like smoke. At 2 a.m., the silence shattered. A crash echoed downstairs, followed by deliberate footsteps, slow, heavy, pacing the attic. Then a soft, chilling whisper floated under my door. "Mommy. Daddy." I dared a peek into the hallway. There, on the landing, the doll stood upright, something I was sure it had never done before. Its head tilted, a mocking nod. We decided to bury it. Wrapped in a thick black blanket and sealed in an old wooden box, we buried the doll deep in the backyard under the oldest oak tree, hoping to trap the restless spirit once and for all. The house fell silent. The whispers stopped. Emily's fear slowly ebbed away. But every Halloween since, I check the yard. I glance into Emily's old room, and sometimes, when the wind shifts just right, I swear I hear the soft padding of tiny footsteps on the attic floor. Some gifts are never just gifts, and some things, no matter how much you want to believe otherwise, should never come home with you, especially on Halloween. Halloween has always carried a strange, electric energy, even in a quiet town like mine. But the Halloween I turned 17, the last one I'd spend at home before leaving for college, was the first time I understood that fear didn't need ghosts or monsters. Sometimes it comes from the real world, and it hides in plain sight. Our neighborhood was the kind where nothing bad ever happened. Or at least that's what we all like to tell ourselves. Our house was on the wealthier side of town, big enough to make visitors pause, but it was our next-door neighbor's house that always drew attention. Let's call them Mike and Donna. Their house was massive, sitting on that fine line between a large, impressive home and a full-on mansion. But it wasn't the size that made it notorious. It was the way they decorated. Every year, Mike and Donna turned Halloween into a spectacle. By October 1st, their yard would be filled with fake graves, bloody body bags, and grotesque corpses that looked horrifyingly real. Their decorations weren't the silly, smiling ghosts or cute pumpkin inflatables most people put out. They went full horror movie. And every year, people drove by to gawk, take videos, and sometimes even stop in the street just to snap a photo. Their Halloween displays were practically famous in the neighborhood. That year, Halloween fell on a Friday, a rare blessing for any high school senior wanting to celebrate. My dog, Bear, usually a calm, sleepy golden retriever, had other plans. At around 4 a.m., the darkness of early morning still thick over the streets, Bear started barking, sharp, insistent, like he was trying to warn me of something. I called for him to stop, my voice cracking through the silence, and my mom came out into the hall to shush him as well. Bear finally calmed down, but the unease didn't. Whatever he had sensed, I couldn't see. I tried to push it from my mind and fell back asleep, uneasy but pretending nothing was wrong. 2 hours later, my alarm went off. Groggy, I got ready for school, my senses still tingling with that early morning dread. My dad was leaving for work, and when he stepped onto the front deck, he came back inside, irritation written across his face. "Zach, clean up the dog," he snapped. Confused, I assured him there was nothing to clean. He muttered something under his breath and left, clearly in a hurry. But the faint smell, sharp and unpleasant, lingered in my nostrils. I couldn't identify it, but it was wrong. I stepped outside to leave for school, and the smell hit me stronger, pungent and sour. It wasn't dog feces, not that I could see, yet my stomach twisted. It clung to the morning air and followed me as I walked down the street. I tried to shake it off as imagination, but the unease grew. By the time I got home at 2 in the afternoon, the smell had intensified, crawling into every corner of my mind. My parents were at work, leaving me to hand out candy when the trick-or-treaters arrived. As evening approached, the first children came, their costumes bright and cheerful, their laughter masking something darker beneath. But the smell followed them, growing stronger each time I opened the door. Parents wrinkled their noses, muttering complaints. "What is that smell?" one asked. Another parent said it was worse than anything they'd ever experienced. My eyes drifted next door, drawn instinctively to Mike and Donna's yard. Their Halloween display was elaborate as always, but now the horror felt real. Something was wrong. One of their body bags, usually perched on the lawn in perfect, terrifying detail, was lying flat on the ground. And the stench, oh God, the stench, was concentrated there. I froze, dread coiling in my chest. I went outside, my heart hammering, and approached the neighbors. "Do you smell that?" I asked, my voice tight. It wasn't really a question. Mike and Donna had already noticed. Mike's face went pale, his usual confident composure gone. "I didn't put that there," he muttered, his eyes scanning the yard as though expecting someone to appear from the shadows. The smell was unbearable, a rotting, acidic stench that turned my stomach and made my head spin. Fear clawed at me as I realized this wasn't a prop, not even a realistic one. My mind refused to believe it, but every instinct screamed the truth. Mike ran to the garage and grabbed a knife, his hands shaking. He hesitated for a heartbeat, and that pause was enough for my stomach to sink. The moment the top of the bag was cut open, I wished I hadn't been there. The face inside was human, rotting, twisted in death. The smell exploded around us, a wave of nausea that made us all stagger back. Hands flew to mouths, some gagged outright, and the crowd of children and parents that had gathered for candy stepped back, eyes wide in disbelief. Somehow, I managed to pull myself together enough to call the police. Their arrival turned the entire block into a crime scene. Officers shouted at people to clear out, but the crowd only grew, whispers rippling through the air. My stomach churned as I remembered bears barking. I told the police about it, about the early hours, about the sound of warning that had gone unheeded. Over the next week, the investigation revealed that the body belonged to a local man in his 30s, someone who had apparently taken his own life. Who placed it in Mike and Donna's yard and why remained a mystery. It didn't make sense. Mike and Donna were kind, beloved neighbors. They weren't flashy in a way that attracted malice, except maybe for their extravagant decorations. The more I thought about it, the more sinister it became. Someone had deliberately chosen their property, seeing a perfect place to stage this horror. In the days that followed, I couldn't sleep. Every rustle of leaves, every shadow on the street, every faint noise from the night made me jump. Halloween was never safe again. Even mundane activities, the walk to the mailbox, letting Bear out at night, felt like minefields. I replayed the image of that body bag over and over, the grotesque face, the unimaginable reality of death lying casually among props meant for laughter. Even now, I pass that street and can't help but glance at the yard, half expecting to see something horrific again. The spectacle that was meant to delight the neighborhood had been corrupted, tainted forever by that real-life terror. Halloween is no longer about candy, costumes, or harmless scares. It is about unpredictability, about the cruel reality that someone, somewhere, may use fear as a weapon, and it can appear in the most ordinary places. I still remember that Halloween like it was yesterday, every shadow and every whisper etched in my memory. I was just 7 or 8 then, small enough to feel invisible, but old enough to crave the thrill of independence. That year, instead of my mom dropping me off, she left me at my friend Tyler's house. Tyler and his friend Michael, who was a year older, were going to lead the way. I couldn't hide my excitement or the knot of nerves tightening in my stomach. Tyler's house was always strange. A faint, musky smell of cat clung to the air, and his older sister, at least 20, lingered constantly with some guy, never sparing me a glance. His parents were mostly absent, leaving Tyler the kind of freedom I secretly envied. But there was also a creeping unease in that house, like it held a secret no one wanted to share. Michael was already waiting when I arrived, pillow sacks in hand, ready for candy conquest. It wasn't long before we realized Tyler's mom and sister were nowhere to be found that evening. I felt a cold prickle of discomfort. Mom would have scolded me for going unsupervised, but the intoxicating freedom, no adults watching, was a siren call. We spent the first couple of hours roaming the usual blocks, trading candy and telling little white lies about our parents being close by, with Tyler's sister nearby to keep watch. It always worked. Around 8, after a quick pizza break at Tyler's, we ventured into an unfamiliar, quieter part of the neighborhood. The streetlights flickered weakly, casting long, twitching shadows that seemed to crawl across the cracked sidewalks. Most houses were dark, only a few trick-or-treaters dared roam this far, and the silence pressed against us like thick fog. Then we noticed him. A man, moving slowly a few houses behind, pushing a stroller. At first, I thought he was just a dad, tired after a long night, bringing his daughter home. But there was something off. His pace was too slow, deliberate, almost stalking. He hummed softly under his breath, a lullaby, sweet and sing-song. But it sent a cold wave curling down my spine. "Hey, boys! How's the trick-or-treating going?" he called out, his voice too cheerful for the creeping darkness. "Good," we replied cautiously. "It's late," he said, gesturing to the stroller. "I'm heading home, but I can give you the rest of my candy. My daughter's asleep under the canopy. You can't see her." Tyler and I exchanged excited looks. Jackpot. "Come on," Tyler said, and we started following him. The streetlights dimmed as we walked, shadows deepening at the edges of my vision. The man kept talking, asking our names, our schools, where we lived. I let Tyler answer, instinctively deferring to him. Every now and then, the man leaned over the stroller, speaking in a high, gentle voice. I assumed he was soothing his daughter. but the tone was wrong. Too soft, too forced, like a puppet's lullaby. Finally, he led us to his house, a small faded two-story with peeling paint and a porch light that buzzed faintly. He unlocked the door and carried the stroller inside first, then gestured for us to follow. "He'll be right back," he said before disappearing into the shadows. The stroller sat center stage in the dim living room, a dark, looming shape under its folding canopy. I nudged Tyler. "Why leave the candy so far away?" I whispered. Tyler didn't answer. His hands trembled as he stepped forward and lifted the cover. The thing inside wasn't a baby. It was a doll, grotesquely realistic, with glassy eyes that caught the faint light like shards of broken glass. Its skin looked too smooth, too pale, like wax that might melt with a touch. The soft buzz of the porch light above us crackled, and I felt the hairs on my arms rise like frozen spikes. Tyler's face went ghostly pale. "Let's go," he hissed. We bolted out, our footsteps pounding against cracked sidewalks as the cold night air bit at our faces. My pillow sack dragged behind me, catching on stones. Our hearts thundered so loud I thought the whole world could hear. Then, a woman's voice cut through the silence, trembling with concern. "Do you boys know that man?" She rushed toward us, her eyes wide and searching. Tyler explained quickly. The man had offered candy, but the stroller held a fake baby. Goosebumps crawled down my skin as she nodded grimly. "He doesn't have a child," she said softly. "I saw you with him." She drove us home. Mom's face was furious and terrified all at once. Calls were made. Police came. I never learned what happened to that man, but I remember the lullaby he hummed, soft, slow, endless. When I close my eyes now, I still hear it, curling like smoke in my ears, and it makes my stomach turn. Halloween lost its magic that night. It became a dark reminder. Some dangers hide behind smiles and stroller canopies, waiting for kids too trusting, too excited, or too young to understand. Last year, on Halloween night, I was 18, and my best friend Andrew was 17. At that age, we thought we were too old for trick-or-treating, and handing out candy seemed childish and dull. I wanted something thrilling, something that would make the night memorable. That's when I remembered the old abandoned house near my street, a sprawling, derelict place that had been empty for years. I suggested we explore it. Andrew wasn't convinced. "You're crazy," he said. "We could get arrested, or worse, something could happen." I shrugged and teased him. "Stop being a baby. It'll be fun. Halloween is for getting scared anyway." After a little back and forth, he reluctantly agreed. We waited until it was dark, carrying flashlights, and made our way to the house. Its boarded-up windows and sagging roof loomed over us like a warning, but I couldn't resist the thrill. The place looked as though it had been abandoned for decades. Broken glass, rotting wood, and layers of dust covering every surface. I grinned at the sight. "This is perfect." Andrew muttered under his breath about jail and trouble, but I ignored him. I pushed the front door, expecting it to be locked, like any normal abandoned house. To my surprise, it creaked open. My heart raced. We exchanged a glance, half excitement, half dread, but there was no turning back now. Stepping inside, the house smelled of decay and mildew. Broken furniture lay scattered in shadows, and the faint wind whistled through cracks in the walls. I shined my flashlight around the entry hall. Dust motes danced in the beam, giving the air an eerie, surreal quality. The house had 2 floors, and Andrew immediately suggested he check upstairs while I stayed downstairs. I sighed and followed, exploring the empty rooms on the ground floor. One room, likely a bedroom, was completely bare. The floor creaked under my footsteps. I wanted something scary to happen, maybe a bat or a rat scurrying across the floor. But the only thing there was silence. Then I heard it, a loud crack behind me, like someone stepping on a weak floorboard. I spun, flashlight swinging, but there was nothing. My chest tightened. Maybe it's just the house settling. I muttered, though I didn't believe myself. Curiosity got the better of me. I wandered down the hallway, and a doorway caught my eye. It looked like the kitchen. I hesitated, then stepped inside. Dust coated the counters, and cobwebs hung from the ceiling like tattered curtains. As I moved, my foot caught on something hard. I looked down. A large kitchen knife lay on the floor. My stomach sank. I didn't touch it, but the presence of it unsettled me even more. Who had left it there? Why was it so carelessly abandoned in a place no one lived? I was about to leave the kitchen when a scream pierced the house. My blood ran cold. It was Andrew. I sprinted up the stairs, the flashlight bouncing wildly across the walls. The second floor was darker, more oppressive, the air thick with the smell of mildew and neglect. I followed the sound to a bedroom at the end of the hall. Andrew was cowering in the corner, holding his flashlight like a lifeline. But he wasn't alone. Another figure stood in the room, tall, masked, and silent. The mask was grotesque, Halloween-like, yet terrifying in its anonymity. I couldn't tell if it was a man or woman. "Hey, leave him alone!" I shouted, my voice cracking. The figure laughed, a low, chilling sound that echoed off the walls. Panic surged through me. My only option was desperate action. I hurled my flashlight as hard as I could. It hit the figure square in the face, and it let out a yelp of pain. Andrew didn't waste a second. He scrambled to his feet, and we bolted down the stairs, the masked figure yelling after us. Every step reverberated through the empty house. Dust and debris flew under our feet as we tore out the front door and into the cold night air. We didn't stop running until we reached the safety of the street, hearts hammering, breaths ragged. Andrew pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the police," he said, still shaking. Minutes later, he looked frustrated. The dispatcher dismissed it as a Halloween prank. "It's Halloween, sir," the voice said. "Probably just someone in costume. Be safe," though we knew better. There was no trick here. Whoever or whatever was in that house had been living there. The knife, the masked figure, the eerie laughter. It wasn't staged. It was real. For a moment, I considered returning to investigate, to see if there were signs of occupancy, but the rational part of me screamed to stay away. Later, we tried to find information online about the house. History, past owners, anything. But there was nothing. It was as though the house existed only as it did that night. A perfect, isolated trap. Andrew and I concluded that the person must have been using it as a hideout. Someone who didn't want to be seen but needed shelter. A thief, a squatter, or worse. After that Halloween, we never ventured into abandoned houses again. Trick-or-treating or handing out candy suddenly seemed much safer in comparison. The thrill of fear had crossed a line that night, teaching us the weight of real danger. That house, with its peeling paint, broken windows, and shadows that hid more than dust, was a place we would never forget. Even now, I think about the mask, the laughter, and the knife. Halloween no longer feels like fun. It feels like a reminder of how quickly curiosity can turn into terror. And Andrew and I? We stick to candy bowls and porch lights. Anything else, and I know we'd be courting trouble too dangerous to flirt with again. Halloween had always been special in our Albuquerque neighborhood, but that year it felt different. The kind of different that sneaks in like a shadow at dusk. Quiet, slow, but impossible to ignore. Our street was lined with modest houses, the kind where everyone knew each other's names and kids roamed free until the streetlights flickered on. Usually it was calm, almost sleepy. But this year, a restless energy stirred. Maybe it was the way the wind bit sharper that October, or the way the clouds piled thick and low like a storm ready to burst. Mom was determined to make our corner house the most festive on the block. For weeks, she'd been planning, buying decorations, dragging me along to the store. On the Saturday before Halloween, I'd spent the whole day with her, climbing ladders, untangling lights, and arguing about the best place to put the fog machines. "Come on, Max," she said with a grin. "This year, we're going to win the neighborhood contest." I rolled my eyes but smiled anyway. At 17, I was old enough to be embarrassed by Mom's enthusiasm, but still young enough to enjoy the thrill of the holiday. By late afternoon, the yard looked like a scene from a horror movie. Skeletons hanging lifeless from the gutters, fake cobwebs stretching across the bushes like ancient lace, and orange lights pulsing softly through the fog. The air smelled of damp earth and pumpkin spice, mixed with the faint hum of electricity from the fog machines. But as the sun sank below the horizon, the mood shifted. Clouds rolled in thick and fast, swallowing the fading daylight, and a cold wind swept through the neighborhood. It wasn't the playful breeze of earlier, but sharp and biting, forcing the last of the kids to hurry past, their laughter swallowed by the gusts. Mom's cheerful smile faded. She watched the street from the front window, hands clenched on the curtain. "Maybe we didn't put out enough decorations," she muttered under her breath. I wanted to say it wasn't our fault, that the weather was scaring the kids away, but I could see the frustration simmering in her eyes. Then she glanced toward the hallway, her voice low but firm. "Go get the last bin of Halloween stuff. The one in the attic, in the back corner." The word hit me like a cold splash of water. The attic. It was the one place in the house I never wanted to think about. The narrow crawl space, accessible only through a creaky pull-down door in the hallway ceiling, held more than just dusty boxes and forgotten memories. It held unease. I hesitated, my pulse quickening. "Do I have to?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Mom looked at me, eyes serious. "Please, Max." Just the one bin, I swallowed and nodded, forcing my feet to move. The hallway was dim and silent. The wooden floorboards creaked underfoot, their familiar groans suddenly foreign and threatening. I reached the attic door, a chipped white panel barely blending into the ceiling. My hand trembled as I grabbed the cord and pulled. The hinges protested loudly, the door falling open with a slow, eerie creak that echoed down the narrow passage. A blast of cold, stale air wafted down, carrying the scent of dust, old wood, and something faintly metallic that made my skin prickle. I climbed the ladder, each rung slippery with age. The crawl space swallowed me in darkness. The air up there was thick and musty, like a forgotten cellar. Low wooden beams arched overhead, their rough surfaces covered in spiderwebs that brushed my face. Boxes piled high pressed against the walls, silent watchers in the gloom. I flicked on my phone's flashlight and scanned the piles. The orange bin labeled Halloween peeked out from behind a stack of old books and brittle photo albums. I reached for it, dragging it free with a scrape. As I turned to descend, a sudden sharp crack echoed from the far corner of the attic. My heart seized. I froze, straining to listen. The space was supposed to be empty. Probably just the house settling, I whispered to myself, but the words felt hollow. I hurried down the ladder, fighting the urge to look back. When my feet hit the hallway floor, I let out a shaky breath and slammed the attic door closed. The rest of the evening was a strange kind of normal. We added a few last decorations outside, but the rain began soon after, soft at first, then heavy and relentless. Halloween faded like a ghost into the storm. I retreated to my room with my laptop and headphones, trying to block out the gloom. But beneath the music and the rain, I caught it. A faint creak from above. The attic again. I pulled one earbud out and strained to listen. Nothing but the storm. I told myself I was imagining things. But when midnight came, the storm howled like a beast at the windows. Rain hammered the glass in an unrelenting tattoo. The wind whistled through every crack and crevice. And then, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, pacing just above my head. I froze, heart thudding, eyes wide. At first I thought Mom might be up, moving decorations, but it was far too late. I yanked out my earbuds and held my breath. The steps stopped. I crept into the hallway, muscles tight, senses screaming. The attic door hung slightly open. The ladder dropped just a few inches. Someone was in the house. Then, from the kitchen, a fridge door opening, plastic bags rustling. "Mom," I whispered. Silence. I tiptoed to her room. She and my little sister were asleep, breathing softly. I backed away, heart racing, and woke Mom with a trembling voice. "There's someone here," I whispered. Her eyes snapped open. What? Kitchen. They came from the attic. She pulled the covers back, grabbed my sister's hand, and whispered, "Call 911. Don't make a sound." I dialed, voice barely a breath. Mom crept to the hallway, peeking toward the kitchen. She returned seconds later, shutting and locking the door. "He's climbing into the attic," she murmured. We huddled together, listening to the storm mask the intruder's movements above. Minutes stretched into eternity. Then a knock at the front door. Police. Mom let them in, and I peeked down the hallway. The attic door was closed. Officers moved quickly, flashlights cutting through the dark, weapons drawn. They climbed the ladder into the cramped space. "Got someone," one called down. A man emerged, disheveled, wild-eyed, clothes dirtied and torn. He said he'd snuck in the day before, through a front door left ajar. He'd been living in the attic, watching, listening. The creaks, the footsteps, all his. They took him away. Mom didn't press charges. I felt violated. My home was no longer safe. Halloween 2004 was supposed to be a night of joy, of frivolity, a chance to escape the grueling year I had endured. But it became the most terrifying night of my life, one that would haunt me every time I lay down to sleep thereafter. It had been a long, exhausting journey to this point. My marriage had ended 2 years prior, a prolonged and grueling process that left me emotionally battered. The abuse I endured had chipped away at my self-confidence, my trust in others, and sometimes even my ability to recognize danger. By the time the divorce was finalized, I was finally free. But freedom didn't feel easy. Being a single parent to my young daughter meant carrying the weight of all responsibility on my own. I had to navigate bills, school, and work, while also figuring out how to re-enter the world as a single woman after years of isolation. Amid all this, my friendships became my lifeline. Jane, my closest friend, had been with me through every step of the divorce. When she agreed to accompany me to a Halloween party across town, I felt a spark of excitement that I hadn't experienced in months. For the first time in years, I would have a night to myself, without my daughter. Halloween had always been fun for her and me, but now it represented something different, a brief, almost illicit taste of independence. We spent the day preparing our costumes. I decided on a hippie outfit, with flowing skirts, beaded necklaces, and glitter smeared across my face. Jane went as a pirate, complete with a sword, eye patch, and braided hair. I remember the way she laughed as she helped me braid my hair into tiny sections, teasing me for looking more like a festival girl than a Halloween hippie. We were giddy, planning jokes and posing in front of the mirror, and for a brief moment, I felt normal again, like the years of trauma and responsibility had melted away. As we drove to the party, the streets were already dim with the early evening gloom. Shadows stretched unnaturally under the flickering streetlights, and the wind had picked up, rattling the fallen leaves across the asphalt. I remember gripping the steering wheel tightly, the knots of anxiety I carried about being single and older than most of the partygoers gnawing at me. Yet a part of me clung to the excitement, reminding myself that tonight was for fun. The house we arrived at had been transformed into a miniature haunted mansion. Fog machines hissed in corners, smoke coiling like spectral fingers along the floor. Jack-o'-lanterns glowed in the dim light, and cobwebs clung to chandeliers and staircases. The scent of popcorn and spiced cider mingled with the faint tang of fake blood from decorations, creating a strange, festive smell that tickled my senses. But the moment I stepped inside, I felt the first pang of discomfort. Nearly everyone was a couple. Jane and I were alone. It wasn't just the loneliness of the room. It was a deep, hollow sensation that reminded me of every romantic disappointment and every judgment I felt as a mother who was too complicated for men. My eyes scanned the room, catching laughter, the clinking of glasses, and conversations I felt too disconnected to join. I tried to focus on Jane, on the fun of the night, but a subtle sense of alienation crept in, a shadow that tainted the excitement. We mingled, trying to chat and dance. I laughed, sipped cider, and forced a casual smile, but my thoughts kept drifting. The divorce, the fear of never finding love again. the isolation of raising a child alone. Every joke felt slightly hollow, every smile from strangers slightly forced. I told myself to relax, to enjoy the party, but the unease lingered like a faint, nagging shadow. By the time Jane and I decided to leave, the party had reached its peak. Music thumped from hidden speakers, laughter echoed from every corner, and couples whispered secrets and flirtations in shadowed hallways. I slipped out, leaving the warmth of the gathering behind, feeling heavier with each step. The drive home was long and quiet, the road slick from a creeping drizzle that had begun. I told myself I was tired, that it was the weather, that everything was normal. But deep down, I felt exposed, alone, and vulnerable. When I arrived home around midnight, exhaustion pulled at me, dragging me straight to bed. I slipped under the covers, hoping sleep would offer escape, a way to erase the discomfort and isolation I had carried all day. But sleep did not come as a friend. It came as a gate, a passage into horror. I awoke drenched in sweat, heart hammering, every muscle taut with fear. At first, I thought it was a nightmare, remnants of my insecurities and anxieties manifesting in shadow and dread. But then I realized it wasn't my imagination. There was a weight on my right hip, cold and heavy, pinning me to the mattress. My arms were trapped beneath me, and for the first time in my life, I understood true helplessness. Above me loomed a shape, a man, though blurred, indistinct, and partially invisible, like some predator rendered from a dream. I could not make out his features, only the general outline. It was almost as if he were not entirely there, a presence that existed just at the edge of perception. Panic surged through me, coiling tight around my chest. I struggled to speak. "Please, go." My voice was barely audible, cracking under fear. Every attempt to push him off failed. The weight was impossible. I tried again, my hands scrabbling at him, my breath ragged, heart racing with adrenaline. And then, finally, after what felt like hours, I managed to scream. He moved back, stepping toward the doorway. He lingered there, leaning casually against the frame as if he had all the time in the world. I whispered frantic pleas for him to leave, tears streaming down my cheeks. My voice shook, my body trembling in fear. Slowly, almost deliberately, he drifted down the hallway, pausing at the stair railing before fading into nothingness, like a shadow collected by the wind. I sat there, trembling, listening to the silence. Every nerve in my body was on edge. Sleep would never be a refuge again, I realized. The house, once my sanctuary, had been invaded. Every familiar corner now held a hint of dread. Every creak, a possible warning. The next morning, I called a psychic I knew, recounting every detail of the night. She listened, nodding gravely. "When we are in low, vulnerable states," she explained, "we leave ourselves open. Negative emotions, despair, and fear create cracks through which spirits or darker presences can enter. You experienced a manifestation of that vulnerability. It is not your fault, but it is a warning to guard your energy and your mind." She performed a small banishing ritual in my living room, incense curling into the air, soft chants vibrating against the walls. A strange calm returned afterward, but the shadow of that night lingered. I still felt eyes on me in the dark, heard whispers where there were none. My mind, once my ally, now questioned every creak, every flicker of light, every shadow in my peripheral vision. Weeks turned into months, and I developed habits to protect myself, checking locks obsessively, placing chairs under doors, sleeping with a nightlight. Halloween became a particularly uneasy time, the anniversary of the intrusion, a permanent mark on my psyche. Friends noticed my unease, my jumpiness, the way I flinched at normal household noises. I would laugh it off, but inside, I was still tethered to that night, to the terror of feeling watched, pinned, and powerless. Even now, years later, I still remember the sensation, the cold pressure on my hip, the invisible weight, the outline of that figure. Halloween parties, decorations, the rush of costume planning, they all exist in a separate world from that night. The figure, the fear, the helplessness, they remain etched into my memory. And sometimes, when I climb into bed alone, the memory returns. I feel the shadow of him, lingering at the foot of my bed. I pull the covers tighter around me, my heart racing, but I will not turn my back. I will not allow myself to be caught unprepared again, because that night taught me something I cannot unlearn. That true horror is not monsters in the street or ghosts in a graveyard. True horror is the invasion of your home, your mind, your sanctuary. When someone or something crosses the threshold you never expected, leaving you vulnerable, powerless, and forever changed. Halloween will never be fun for me again. The costumes, the candy, the parties, they exist only in the light of day, far from the shadows that creep at the edges of memory. And every time I close my eyes, I remember the figure at the foot of the bed, a reminder of how thin the line between comfort and terror can be. Even in my own home, even in my own bed, the shadow of that night remains. When I was 15, Halloween nights weren't particularly exciting on our small Norwegian peninsula. I was too old to trick or treat and too young to be invited to parties. The streets were mostly deserted, except for a few kids darting from house to house, their costumes clashing with the dull gray sky and the early winter chill. That year, I chose to stay inside, alone in my bedroom, buried deep in RuneScape. The room was dark except for the bluish glow of my monitor, casting flickering shadows across the cluttered walls lined with posters and textbooks. The cold bite of autumn seeped under the window frame, but I barely noticed. I wore noise-canceling headphones, shutting out the world, absorbed in clicking, questing, leveling up. Occasionally, the hum of the heater would kick in, a distant car would rumble past, or I'd catch the faint crackle of static from the old radio in the living room. These mundane sounds anchored me in reality, but my focus remained narrow, locked on the pixelated landscape glowing on my screen. Around 9 o'clock, my mom popped her head in, tapping my shoulder softly and calling my name. I didn't hear her over the game. A moment later, the front door slammed somewhere down the hall, making me jump. I assumed she had stepped out for a few minutes and sank back into the game's familiar rhythm. Time slipped by. I can't say how long. My concentration was absolute. That's when the first prickling sensation hit me, creeping along my skin like icy fingers brushing my neck. It was subtle, almost dismissible, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I paused the game, eyes darting toward the doorway, down the long hallway that led to my mom's room. The hallway was swallowed in darkness, the house's single dim light off for the night. My pupils strained, adjusting from the monitor's glow to the near-complete blackness. Shadows seemed to twist, stretch, and pulse against the walls as if breathing. A knot of dread curled in my stomach, tightening with every breath. I swallowed hard, telling myself it was nothing. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe the shadows played tricks on tired eyes. But then, my gaze caught something unnatural. A pale green glow pulsed faintly at the far end of the hallway, soft but persistent, almost breathing with life. My heartbeat quickened. I blinked, hoping it was a trick of the light, but the glow solidified, taking form. A face, or a mask. The mask was fluorescent green, impossibly bright in the darkness. Two hollow black holes stared out, empty and unblinking. The mouth was a thin slit, expressionless but unnerving. It didn't move. I thought maybe a prank, a neighbor's kid trying to scare me. But then the figure stepped forward. Not floating, not gliding. Steady footsteps, slow and deliberate. The air in the room thickened, colder. The floorboards beneath the hallway creaked faintly, a sound too human for the quiet night. The figure raised a finger to the mask's lips in a silent shushing gesture. Then, in a deep, oddly smooth voice that didn't belong to any local I knew, it whispered, "I'm just a trick-or-treater." I couldn't move. My throat tightened. So, trick or treat?" I stammered, voice barely audible, trembling. No answer. The figure took another step closer, each one slow, deliberate, echoing down the hall. My room shrank. The bed felt like a flimsy barricade. the monitor's light a weak shield against the oppressive dark. Panic surged like a wave. I lunged for the door, slammed it shut, and pressed my full weight against it. Outside, a breath, deep, slow, menacing, floated through the wood. The doorknob rattled, sending tremors through my body. I squeezed my eyes shut, hands gripping the edges of the doorframe like a lifeline. Sweat dripped down my back, chilling and burning all at once. A sudden scrape, like nails dragged along wood, made me flinch. I whimpered, my mind spiraling between reason and terror. Was this really a prank, or something worse? The breathing slowed, then stopped. Footsteps retreated, fading down the stairs. I wanted to believe the nightmare was over, but a strange sound followed, a faint, dragging noise from the hallway outside my door. Something heavy, scraping against the floor. I dared a peek through the crack under the door. The sack. A large Hessian sack lay just beyond the doorway, its coarse fabric stained dark with fresh, sticky smears that caught the pale moonlight slipping through the windows. My heart froze. The police later told me no footprints, no signs of forced entry, nothing to suggest someone had been inside. But the sack remained. For months I avoided being alone, especially on Halloween. I triple-checked every lock, every shadow, every creak. The image of that glowing green mask, the hollow eyes, the silent stalking, the finger pressed to shush me, played like a broken record in my mind. Sometimes when the house was quiet, I swear I hear the faint dragging noise again. Years later, after I moved away from the peninsula, I uncovered a whispered local legend, a figure that roams Halloween nights, silently targeting those who ignore the spirit of the holiday. They say the glow is a warning or a curse, a prelude to something unspeakable. I'm not sure what I encountered that night, but sometimes, late at night, when the shadows grow long and the wind howls through the trees, I still see those hollow eyes and the finger pressed to lips. And I know, some things aren't just tricks or treats, there's something far worse. It was Halloween night in 2013, and I was 14. Since I could remember, I'd gone trick-or-treating with the same group of friends. We all went to the same small school, so our circle didn't really expand beyond that. Our town was quiet. Too quiet, maybe. And our parents trusted us to wander on our own. Looking back now, I realize how naive we were. What happened that night changed the way I saw the world, even if just a little. I met up with my friends Kevin and Sam at my house, already dressed in our costumes. I was a pirate that year, nothing fancy, but the others' outfits weren't memorable. My mom handed me a cell phone, even though I didn't have one of my own yet. "Take it with you," she said, pressing it into my hand. "You never know." At the time, I thought it was just a precaution. The streets were bathed in the orange glow of the setting sun, streetlights flicking on as darkness crept in. Our neighborhood had a neat layout, houses lined up along straight streets. At the far end lay a patch of forest with a narrow creek running through it. Beyond that stood our middle school, a place that usually felt ordinary, safe. That night, it didn't. We went from house to house, candy bags slowly filling, the evening warm and playful. Laughter echoed as kids darted past, costumes rustling, candy wrappers crinkling. That comfort, that normalcy, made what came next feel even more unreal. It began with a car, slow, deliberate, creeping behind us. A single man inside, dressed in a clown costume so elaborate it looked professional, not store-bought. His makeup was half-smeared, as if he'd been wearing it for hours. His eyes, bright, unblinking, made my stomach tighten. Kevin and Sam felt it too. His gaze lingered far too long before he turned down another street and disappeared. We didn't speak of it, but the unease hung heavy in the air. By 9 o'clock, most houses were dark. Trick-or-treating was winding down. We decided on one last stop near the woods, beside the old high school. It was a daring choice, but none of us wanted the night to end. The streets were still lit, but passing through the school gate, the light vanished. The playground was nearly pitch black, shadows pooling in every corner. Our eyes slowly adjusted, revealing the basketball courts and a worn bench beneath twisted branches. We sat, laughing nervously, munching candy, trying to shake the earlier unease. Then Sam noticed him. A figure moved toward us, tall, over 6 feet. Of course, a clown. The same one. My heart froze. His makeup was smeared, his eyes unnervingly bright against the pale white paint. From neck to toe, he wore full clown regalia. Oversized shoes, puffy pants, bright colors, but no wig, no hat. Just a twisted smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Hey there, guys. How's your night been?" His voice was casual, almost friendly, but every word dripped wrongness. I felt my pulse thudding in my throat. We didn't answer. My phone vibrated in my pocket, buzzing with calls I couldn't process. The clown leaned forward slightly, grinning wider. "Got some candy left from a party. Want some? Just come with me." He pointed toward the shadows near the school entrance, where his car waited, half hidden. My stomach clenched. Something was very wrong. Kevin made the first move. He bolted, sprinting in the opposite direction. Sam and I didn't hesitate. Adrenaline surged, legs pumping, hearts hammering. Behind us, we heard him, the shuffle of oversized shoes, slow but deliberate, not chasing, just coming, watching. We darted between the basketball courts, breaths ragged, shadows closing in. I glanced back, his silhouette twisted, unnaturally still despite the movement. We reached the far end of the playground. The gate locked tight. Panic surged. We scrambled over it, landing in the small woods bordering the school. The trail beneath our feet was loose dirt and dead leaves, muffling our steps but amplifying every snap of twig and rustle. Branches scraped against my arms. The shadows seemed to stretch and crawl, alive, closing in. My phone vibrated again. Missed calls, frantic texts. I shoved it back into my pocket, focusing on the one sound that made my blood run cold. The slow, steady footsteps behind us, never faster, never slower. Finally, we burst onto the sidewalk. Safe, maybe. My chest heaved as I pulled out the phone. 6 missed calls, all from my mom. Texts, too. One in bold, angry letters. "Come home now." We split up, sprinting to our houses. It took me 10 minutes, lungs burning, mind racing. My mom was on the porch, tears streaming. She pulled me into a tight hug, holding me as if she could squeeze the fear from my bones. 2 police cars slowly patrolled our block, lights flashing. I still didn't understand. Later, I learned why my mom was frantic. Earlier that night, a younger boy had been nearly kidnapped by a man in a clown costume just blocks from the school. His mother had scared the man off and called the police. That was why my calls had gone unanswered. She had known something was wrong. The clown was never caught. But there was one more thing. Days later, a friend at school mentioned a rumor that the clown wasn't just a man, but something else. Something that could vanish into the shadows and return with a smile that wasn't quite human. I never believed it, until the Halloween after next, when I saw him again, standing silently at the edge of the woods, watching. Halloween was supposed to be fun, maybe a little scary. But that night was different. Real fear, the kind that never quite leaves you. Even now, years later, I can still picture his smeared smile, the weight of those oversized shoes on the pavement, and the way the shadows seemed to follow us as we ran. Halloween never felt safe again. The most terrifying night of my life happened on Halloween of 1999. I was 11 years old, just starting secondary school, and my friends and I already knew this would be our last real year of trick-or-treating. Once you hit 12, showing up at someone's door in a half-baked costume meant you'd get more rolled eyes than candy. We didn't want to be those awkward kids with mustaches and acne trying to stretch out childhood one more year. So this Halloween was our last hurrah. That year, The Matrix was everything. Everyone my age had seen it, and we thought dressing as the characters would make us look like the coolest kids in town. Problem was, none of us had money. Two of the boys wore their school shirts and ties with sunglasses, looking more like lost Jehovah's Witnesses than Neo. A couple of us wore knockoff leather jackets. The star of the group, though, was Jamie. His older sister loaned him a real leather trench coat, and with his hair slicked back and combat boots laced tight, he looked like he'd walked straight off the movie poster. We spent an hour running house to house, laughing when old folks squinted at us in confusion and feeling smug when teenagers gave us approving nods. Our pillowcases filled up fast. By the time we'd worked every street in our neighborhood, we were buzzing with sugar and pride. But Jamie wanted more. "There's another estate across the carriageway," he said, jerking his thumb toward the dark horizon. "Bet nobody's hit it yet." The problem was the route. To get there, we'd have to cut through the Homewood estate. Even in daylight, Homewood had a reputation. It wasn't all bad people, but enough older kids hung around there that it felt like walking into someone else's territory. Still, greed and overconfidence got the better of us. We figured if we slipped down the narrow alley that ran parallel to the train tracks, we'd be fine. Halfway down, the path bent sharply to the left, and as we rounded the corner, my stomach dropped. A group of local lads blocked the way. I recognized two immediately, Francis and Anthony Hand, the twins. They were a year or two older than us, always in trouble, always circling fights like sharks. "Look who it is," one of them shouted, and the whole group burst into laughter. They weren't laughing because we looked good. They were laughing because we looked ridiculous, strutting into their territory in dollar store sunglasses and fake leather. And then one of them spotted the bulging pillowcases. "Oi, hand 'em over." We froze. Nobody said anything, but when one of the twins stepped forward, there was a ripple through our group. An unspoken order: run. We exploded into motion, scattering like frightened animals. Two of the boys sprinted left, back toward our neighborhood. Jamie and another peeled off right. I saw a gap in a chain-link fence beside a patch of overgrown scrubland and darted toward it, shoving through jagged metal. My jacket snagged and ripped, but adrenaline pushed me forward. When I looked back, my stomach turned. My friends were still being chased. The twins were fast. Too fast. For a second, I thought about going back. Then survival instinct overruled loyalty. I ducked into the weeds, crouched low, and prayed they'd all run past me. The night pressed in, cold and damp. Every breath sounded deafening in my ears. I waited, knees shaking, until I finally heard the laughter and pounding footsteps fade. Relief loosened my chest. Maybe I'd gotten away. Then the fence rattled. Someone else was climbing through. I shrank deeper into the brush, my heart trying to punch through my ribs. A moment later, a shape moved between the trees, too broad to be one of my friends. When he stepped into the light of a distant street lamp, recognition made my blood run cold. It was Ferry. Everyone knew him. Older, meaner, the kind of boy who didn't just fight. He enjoyed hurting people. He didn't call out, didn't shout. He just walked slow, deliberate, scanning the bushes like a hunter who already knew where his prey was hiding. When his eyes locked on mine, I bolted. The only way out was a brick wall at the far end of the lot. A thin tree leaned against it, and I scrambled up, clawing at the bark. My fingers slipped. I got halfway before I felt a hand clamp around my ankle. The yank sent me crashing down. Pain shot through my leg as I hit the ground, twisting my ankle. Before I could get up, his boot connected with my side, then my arm as I tried to shield my head. I screamed for him to stop. He didn't. His kicks grew harder, more deliberate. When he grabbed at my pants, humiliation flooded me. I shrieked, raw, animal panic tearing out of my throat, and then laughter cut through the night. The Hand twins had arrived, but they weren't laughing at me. They were laughing at him. "What the hell are you doing, Ferry?" Francis sneered, stepping closer. "You trying to feel up little kids now?" Ferry froze, chest heaving. For a moment I thought they were going to gang up on me together, finish what he started, but the twins just kept jeering, circling him like vultures. Red-faced and furious, Ferry spat at the ground. Then, almost as if to prove something, he lashed out one more time, his boot connecting with my ribs, but it was weaker, unfocused. "Pathetic," Anthony muttered. That word broke him. He backed off, muttering curses as he disappeared into the night. I scrambled to my feet, yanking up my pants with shaking hands, and ran until my lungs burned and the lights of my neighborhood glowed ahead. I never told anyone what happened. Not my friends, not my parents. I carried it in silence, the bruises fading, but the memory staying sharp. 7 years later, I heard Fairy was dead, stabbed in some late-night fight, left bleeding in the street. Everyone said it was gang-related. But when I think about the way he cornered me that Halloween, the cruelty in his eyes, I can't help but wonder. How many others did he hurt before someone finally stopped him? If you've made it this far, you're braver than most. Tell me in the comments, which story haunted you the most tonight? And if you had to live through just one of them, which would you choose to survive? And if you want to keep the fear close, even after the story's end, check out our official AG Horrors merch or grab your copy of our creepy books on Amazon. Don't forget to like, share, and catch up on past episodes, because the deeper you go, the darker it gets. Until the next episode, stay safe.